Chapter 1674. Can't you be more normal? Summer was a little speechless as she watched Mu Hongzhi walk out of the thatched hut. Of course, it was just that Mu Hongzhi had walked out of the thatched hut. If a naked realm lord Dit had walked out of the thatched hut, the atmosphere would have been inexplicably awkward. Realm Lord Dit did not expect that Bufang would come back. Looking at Bufang's familiar face, Realm Lord Dit's eyes became moist. Oh, little Boo Boo. Realm Lord Dit strode his long legs toward Bufang, step by step, as if he was running under the setting sun with crystal tears. Bam! As Realm Lord Dit approached Bufang, Summer sent him flying with a slap, her face dark. This guy. I don't like looking at him. Summer rubbed her fists and said. Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufang with a smile. He walked to Bufang's side, patted him on the shoulder, and sighed with emotion. Summer was gone, and Realm Lord Dit was also taken away. Realm Lord Dit wanted to talk about the old days with Bufang, but Summer grabbed his head and dragged him away. Only Mu Hongzhi and Bufang were left on the top of the heaven tree. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back. His white robe was so white that it seemed to shimmer. Standing on the tree with his hands clasped behind his back, he seemed to have merged with the entire Heaven Chief realm. In fact, it was Realm Lord Dit who had merged with the Heaven Chief realm. In front of the thatched hut, Bufang took out a chair from the Heaven and Earth farmland and sat on it, quietly watching Mu Hongzhi's performance. After a long moment of silence, Mu Hongzhi finally opened his mouth. You're indeed the man I like. In such a short time, your cultivation base has reached the level of a god emperor. Mu Hongzhi turned around and said with a smile. His smile was like a spring breeze. Bufang didn't smile. He just nodded at Mu Hongzhi. It was because Bufang sensed that Mu Hongzhi's cultivation base seemed to be even more unfathomable. He might not even be a god emperor. Back then, I was only left with a remnant soul. However, after recuperating, my cultivation base has recovered to its peak. I used to love cooking, but now, it's been a long time since I've held a kitchen knife. Mu Hongzhi said. These words made Bufang squint his eyes slightly, and he became much more spirited. Do you know what happened to me? Bufang asked. As expected, Mu Hongzhi nodded. Since you've chosen this path without hesitation, you're bound to encounter this situation. Now, you don't have a sense of taste, smell, or mental force. You're not a top chef now. Mu Hongzhi said. Why? Bufang narrowed his eyes. This was what he wanted to know. As expected, Mu Hongzhi knew. Mu Hongzhi fell silent. He slowly turned around and looked at Bufang, his eyes gradually becoming a little confused. Because I used to be like you, Mu Hongzhi let out a sigh. It's a choice. You can think of it as a test, but it's a little cruel. To make a person who loves cooking lose his sense of taste, touch, smell, and mental force. It's simply an inhumane torture, said Mu Hongzhi. You have a good and optimistic attitude. Back then, I was frantically looking for a solution, frantically trying to regain my sense of smell, and I wanted to cook. I wanted to continue on the path of becoming a god of cooking. Unfortunately, reality gave me a cruel blow, and I failed in the end. Mu Hongzhi glanced at Bufang with a wry smile. He envied Bufang's current state. He was calm, which he could not do. Of course, Bufang's calmness might only be on the surface. How can I regain my cooking skills? Asked Bufang. That was the key. However, Mu Hongzhi shook his head. I don't know. It depends on you. This is actually a test given to you by it. If you can't complete it, you may be eliminated or even killed, said Mu Hongzhi. The it he mentioned should be referring to the system. Did Mu Hongzhi not know? But I thought a lot after I was resurrected. Everyone has their own answer to this kind of test. Perhaps it wants you to find the essence of your cooking path. Everything has its essence, and if you don't figure it out, you won't be able to reach the top, Mu Hongzhi said seriously. At this moment, he saw himself, who was once confused, in Bufang. Unfortunately, there was no one to answer his questions in the past. Compared to Bufang, he was unfortunate. Otherwise, he might have gone further on the path of becoming a god of cooking. Find the essence of my cooking path. Bufang was stunned. Mu Hongzhi's words made him fall into deep thought. Although Bufang said he wanted to be the god of cooking who stood at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, what was the real path to becoming a god of cooking? Bufang asked himself and found that he had never thought about it. Perhaps he had thought about it when he was condensing the heart of cooking path, but that was only superficial. Now, the system had sealed his mental force and slowly stripped away his sense of touch, smell, and taste. Perhaps it really wanted him to find the essence. If he could really find the essence, even if he didn't have all these, he would still be able to walk on that path without hesitation. Bufang's eyes lit up. Mu Hongzhi seemed to find that Bufang had listened to him. For a moment, he was a little envious. Chirp, chirp, chirp. Little one, come to me, handsome brother. Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufang, who was lost in thought. He smiled and did not disturb him. Instead, he turned to play with Little Hu and Xiaopi, who were sitting on Bufang's shoulders. Little Hu had the heaven god's blood in him, so his bloodline was no longer that of an ordinary nine-tailed fox. Xiaopi, on the other hand, made Mu Hongzhi narrow his eyes slightly. The next moment, the smile on his face grew brighter. Holding the two little ones in his arms, he left the thatched hut. Then, he left the place to Bufang. He also ordered that no one was allowed to step into the place. Bufang sat in a chair and looked into the distance. His eyes were blank as he fell into deep thought. It was not easy to walk to the end of a path because it was always covered with thorns and sharp stones, which made it very difficult to walk. Mu Hongzhi's words made Bufang fall into deep thought. He was thinking or making a choice. In the Heaven Chief realm, the prosperous fourth layer, the fourth layer of the Heaven Chief realm was the most prosperous. After Mu Hongzhi took charge of the Netherworld, he had improved the Heaven Chief realm. After all, the Heaven Chief realm belonged to him, and he had indescribable feelings for it. The Heaven Tree was his magic treasure, and he used it to guard the Heaven Chief realm. It was divided into 4 realms, which was the same as the Heaven Chief realm. Now, the intensity of the spiritual energy in each layer of the Heaven Chief realm was the same. However, the 4th layer was the most prosperous. It was because the Realm King's mansion was located in the 4th layer. Summer had found Mu Hongzhi a long time ago. When she found him, she rolled up her sleeves and fought with him for 300 rounds. Realm Lord Dit was now the incarnation of the great path of the Heaven Chief realm. To him, this was both a good and a bad thing. It was hard for him to improve his cultivation base. This was a bad thing. The good thing was that he was immortal from now on, unless the Heaven Chief realm was destroyed and disappeared. Otherwise, he, Realm Lord Dit, would definitely be the one who had lived the longest. Even longer than the God Emperor. When he learned that Bufang had returned in the 1st layer of the Heaven Chief realm, many old acquaintances came to see Bufang. However, they didn't see him. They thought they would see him in a few days, but they waited for a long time. In the Heaven Chief realm, there were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. It was specially set by Mu Hongzhi. With his strength, it was a piece of cake for him to set the weather. Bufang sat in front of the thatched hut and stared quietly into the distance. Just like that, he looked into the distance quietly, as if he was hesitating, but also as if he was thinking. The pitter-patter of rain began to fall. The rain kept falling from the sky and soaked Bufang. However, Bufang still didn't move. The curtain of rain, which looked like a curtain of beads, was reflected in Bufang's eyes and seemed to be deeply reflected in his heart. Spring passed, and summer arrived. The sun was scorching. Bufang's hair had become dry. His lips seemed to be cracking. Summer arrived, and autumn arrived. The autumn wind rustled. Many leaves fell from the thatched hut behind Bufang. The leaves were yellow and withered, fluttering in the air. Bufang sat motionless in the chair. The leaves piled up several layers. Autumn passed, and winter arrived. Bufang didn't move at all. He was completely covered by the white snow, and his whole body couldn't even be seen. Time passed slowly just like that. No one disturbed him, or woke him up. Occasionally, Mu Hongzhi would come. He would walk around Bufang's body a few times with little Hu and Xiaopi in his arms, and then leave. Mu Hongzhi had no idea what was on Bufang's mind. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Time passed. Finally, once again, the pure white snow fell. Bufang moved. His fingers moved with difficulty, shaking off the snow on his body. Bufang opened his eyes. He raised his hand, and the snow fell. Bufang rose to his feet. With a swoosh, the leaves and snow fell all over the ground. Bufang reached out his hand and touched his face. He had a long beard on his face, which was covered with a long beard. He didn't know how long he had been sitting there. Summer passes quietly. F***ck. Humming a tune, Mu Hongzhi walked to the top of the heaven tree in a mink coat and found Bufang standing up. He was startled and his voice cracked. "Boy, you moved? I thought you were going to turn into a Wang Fu stone and look at me for 3,000 years. Mu Hongzhi put one hand on his hip, patted his chest with the other, and rolled his eyes at Bufang. Coupled with his beautiful face, he looked a little flirtatious. Bufang raised his hand. Divine power swirled around him. His whole body trembled. Immediately his beard receded, and the stains on his body disappeared. The vermilion robe fluttered, and he looked very energetic. However, if one looked closely, they would find that there was something different about Bufang. It was an indescribable change, a change in his temperament. The look in Bufang's eyes became rather deep. Looking at Mu Hongzhi, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. "Is there anything to eat? I'm hungry," Bufang said. Mu Hongzhi rolled his eyes. "Let's go. I'll ask the Heaven Chief I've trained to cook a good meal for you. I'm sure you'll be satisfied." Bufang had woken up. The news spread. Many people's spirits were shaken. Many acquaintances came to find him. The Realm Lord Dit, Summer, Hades Tenzang, the Black Dragon King, and other Netherworld friends all came to find him. Mu Hongzhi also made an arrangement for Bufang. The chefs of the Heaven Chief realm were all in high spirits, ready to show off their cooking skills. It was an event hosted by the Realm King. If they could win the Realm King's appreciation, they would enjoy endless benefits. In the fourth layer of the Heaven Chief realm, in the Immortal City, in the vast square, countless Heaven Chief were ready to go. At Mu Hongzhi's order, they all began to cook. Immortal flames burned, hot steam rose, and a fragrant aroma assailed the nostrils. The Heaven Chief began to show off their skills and cook with all their might. Bufang sat in the judge's seat, his expression unchanged. He just watched the lively competition with mixed emotions. Soon, finally, a Heaven Chief finished cooking the first dish and came up with it. Mu Hongzhi pushed the dish to Bufang. "Here, try it," Mu Hongzhi said. He looked hopefully at Bufang, wondering if Bufang had regained his senses of taste, smell, touch, and mental force. Bufang looked at the steaming dish, which seemed to be glistening with light. He picked up the spoon and gently scooped it up. The soup of the dish flowed down the spoon. It was extremely slippery, and steam rose from it and sprayed onto his face. Bufang took a deep breath. He grabbed the spoon and swallowed the food in the spoon into his stomach. The next moment, Bufang raised his eyebrows slightly. Chapter 1675. How is it? Does it taste good? Mu Hongzhi, who was sitting in a chair and wearing a mink fur cloak, looked curiously at Bufang. The others were also staring at him. Only Bufang knew whether it tasted good or not. If it did, it meant that the former owner Bu was back. Gulp. Bufang swallowed the food and shook his head with a calm expression. "It doesn't taste good," Bufang said faintly. However, his movements weren't slow at all. Soon, he finished the entire dish. The others were a little disappointed. It was a pity that there was no taste. Mu Hongzhi also sighed. That was all he could do to help. In fact, he really hoped that Bufang could continue to walk the path of the god of cooking. At least, he was carrying his hope. He hoped that Bufang could help him finish the path that he couldn't finish. In fact, he also wanted to go to the top of the mountain to see the scenery. Bufang wasn't as sad as these people imagined. Instead, he was gorging himself. One dish after another was placed on the table, and Bufang ate them all, leaving not a drop of soup behind. After eating and drinking to his heart's content, Bufang put down his chopsticks. He breathed out a sigh of relief. Snow was falling, covering the whole Heaven Chief realm in silver. It looked quite beautiful. As Bufang rose to his feet, Little Hu and Xiaopi jumped onto him. Holding Little Hu and Xiaopi in his arms, Bufang said goodbye to the crowd and strode away, disappearing into the wind and snow. Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufang's back with a complicated look in his eyes. Summer and Dit, on the other hand, were slightly taken aback. Did Bufang just leave like that? When they followed him out, they found that Bufang's back was long gone. Just like how he came quietly and left quietly, not taking a single cloud with him. With Bufang's strength, if he wanted to hide, they wouldn't be able to find him. Bufang stayed in the Heaven Chief realm for about 3 days. He walked down the layers of the building. When he walked to the first floor and looked back at the former Heaven Chief restaurant, his expression was a little complicated. The restaurant was the same as before, but the people had changed. After leaving the Heaven Chief realm, Bufang continued walking. He came to Nether Prison and walked quietly. Wherever there was good food, he would eat there. He was fast and he had time. Although he couldn't taste the food, Bufang didn't care. He just ate unhurriedly. After eating the Nether Prison, they would arrive at Earth Prison. When it came to Hell, Bufang's expression was even more complicated. Hades era Lord Go Yu. They all came from Hell. But now they were all gone. He didn't know where Hades era had gone. Lord Go didn't tell him where he had gone either. Yu, on the other hand, was brought back to Void City. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. When he recovered his mental force, he would continue to walk and look for Yu, Lord Go, and the others. In fact, Bufang's favorite time was when everyone was in the restaurant, eating delicious food and watching the sunset together. Bufang walked on foot, carrying Little Hu and Xiaopi, across the desert, over the mountains and across the swamps and lake. He looked for all kinds of delicious food. Every world had different cuisines, but they all had the same general characteristic. Of course, a large part of it depended on the changes in the environment. The food in the desert was certainly different from the food in the mountains, and the food in the swamps was naturally different from the food in the lake. But no matter what, even under very difficult conditions, delicious food still existed. That was the charm of food. Earth Prison, the Ruin Prison, the Abyss, Bufang went to all of them. Finally, Bufang returned to the Hidden Dragon continent. It was a continent he was very familiar with. The continent was also very big. Bufang still walked at an unhurried pace. He had plenty of time. After becoming a god emperor, Bufang had almost unlimited time. However, even if he had unlimited life, he might not be able to find a path. After all, there would always be a dead end. In the imperial capital of the Light Wind Empire, the imperial capital was bustling with activity again. People came and went, and the streets were bustling. Bufang walked with Little Hu in his arms. His vermilion robe was covered with dust and looked dirty. Bufang's hair was also very disheveled, and he wore many pieces of cloth that recorded the delicacies of various places. As he walked on the street, the people around him looked at Bufang with some disgust. After all, such a dirty man could not have come from the imperial capital. Even the beggars in the imperial capital were cleaner than this man. He walked quietly in the imperial capital. Bufang didn't go to Fong Fong's little store. Instead, he went to other restaurants in the imperial capital. So many years had passed. The Light Wind Empire had also changed a lot. Many people had changed. Perhaps they had gone to a higher place, or perhaps they had turned into a pile of dirt. However, Bufang didn't come back to reminisce about the old days. He didn't look for any acquaintances. He just came and left quietly, as long as he could eat what he wanted. Boss Jean walked with his fat belly, his face glowing. He had aged a lot, but his desire for delicacies hadn't changed. He was eager to go to Fong Fong's little store to eat. All of a sudden, a black shadow passed by him. Boss Jean was bewildered. He turned around to see the figure with messy clothes and disheveled hair. On that figure's back was a fox and a golden mantis shrimp. What a familiar figure, Boss Jean rubbed his fat belly, saying. Unfortunately, he couldn't recognize Bufang. Bufang didn't feel nostalgic. The cloth hanging on his body was full, which was his experience along the way. He had forgotten how many years he had spent tasting these delicacies. Although he couldn't taste them, he somehow felt happy. Actually, the hidden dragon continent had many beautiful sceneries and delicacies. In the past, he came and went in a hurry, so he didn't notice them. But now, he had a lot of time to make up for all the things he had missed. Time flew. Time flew. Above the starry sky, on a star that was radiating resplendent light. This was a dead, lifeless star with life. Dust was everywhere. Perhaps many years ago, this star still had traces of life. Unfortunately, today, everything was just an illusion. Bufang sat cross-legged on it. Little Hu and Xiaopi were playing on the star. Following Bufang, they had eaten a lot of delicious food. Little Hu had gained weight. Xiaopi had become more dazzling. Sitting in the starry sky, he looked at the boundless world. Bufang's eyes were a little blurred. Looking back on the path he had taken, he couldn't help but feel emotional. In the past, he had been in a hurry and missed too many things. And now, he needed to make up for all the things he had missed. Looking up at the sky in the curtain of stars, a star crossed the sky at high speed. Bufang sat cross-legged on the ground, his eyes focused. Then, his mind flickered. The white tiger heaven stove, the black turtle constellation walk, the Chilan transmigration ladle, the dragon bone knife, and the vermilion robe all burst out with a strange light. The light shot up to the sky. Heaven and earth changed color. Bufang's dirty body and vigorous hair restored their tidiness. He looked like a real heaven god. Swish. The spring of life flowed backward. Bufang was carefully washing his palms, inside and out, without a speck of dust. A moment later, he held the dragon bone kitchen knife. Boom! The whole star seemed to shake. In the distance, the eyes of Xiaopi and Little Hu, who were playing, suddenly lit up. Squeak! 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 The two raced over, looking at Bufang, who was holding a kitchen knife in the distance. After so many years, Bufang finally touched a kitchen knife. Boom! The scarlet divine flame surged, its scorching heat filling heaven and earth. The black turtle constellation walk flew up, and the white tiger heaven stove also sat in the sky. Bufang was ready to cook. Portions of ingredients flew out one by one. They hovered around Bufang. These were not ordinary ingredients. They were all precious ingredients from the heaven and earth farmland. Some of them were still stained with fresh soil. Bufang closed his eyes. He seemed to be adjusting his breathing, as if he was comprehending something. This was Bufang's first breakthrough. This cooking was very important to him. If he failed, he might end up like Mu Hongzi, a failure that would never end up again. But Bufang didn't want to give up like this. The journey of tasting and searching for delicacies was, in fact, a process of self-understanding for Bufang. Now it was finally time to break through. He knew that the system was also waiting for this moment. Buzz! Bufang's hand shook. The dragon bone kitchen knife spun. Inexplicably, there seemed to be a dragon roar ringing out. Bufang arched his brows and twitched the corner of his mouth. The familiar feeling seemed to have returned. He couldn't cook without a sense of taste? He couldn't cook without a sense of touch? He couldn't cook without mental force? No. All these were just excuses. He exhaled. Bufang's hand shook. The ingredients hovering in the air flew up in an instant. Holding the dragon bone kitchen knife, Bufang slashed it down. This slash turned into thousands of streams of light. Buzz, one by one, the ingredients were cut up by the flowing light. He let go of the dragon bone kitchen knife. Bufang grabbed the black turtle constellation wok. The black turtle constellation wok hit the white tiger heaven stove with a thunderous roar. The terrible explosion was deafening. Rumble! Rumble! The black turtle constellation wok seemed to weigh 10,000 pounds. Every time it smashed down, the starry sky shook. The black turtle constellation wok turned scarlet. Oil was poured into the wok. Sizzling sounds rang out as steam filled the sky. As soon as the ingredients entered the wok, a rumbling sound rang out. That was the sound of energy colliding with each other. Without mental force, it was impossible to control the energy in these ingredients. However, Bufang didn't care. The Qilin transmigration ladle fell, scooping up the ingredients and flipping them over instantly. Waves of fragrance filled the air. Bufang couldn't smell it, but little Hu and Xiaopi, who were in the distance, could. On the other hand, the fox and the shrimp were dancing with joy. They smelled the fragrance as if they could smell the whole world. It was a fragrance they were familiar with. Rumble! The entire starry sky seemed to tremble. Shocking energy fluctuations erupted in the starry sky. Light swirled. One figure after another shot out of the starry sky. Mu Hongzhi stood on a star with his hands clasped behind his back. His beautiful face glowed with fluorescent light, looking indescribably beautiful. Unfortunately, he was a man. Xiaozhi followed beside him and watched quietly. Logically speaking, Realm Lord Di Tai could not leave the immortal cooking realm. However, now that his cultivation base had reached the level of a god king, he could see Bufang's appearance with his projection. Bufang was cooking. Many people were paying attention to him. Many old friends were watching Bufang. Is Bufang going to break down and build up? Xia Xia's beautiful eyes slightly trembled as she looked at Bufang, who was cooking below, and could not help but murmur. Break down and build up? Mu Hongzhi narrowed his eyes and shook his head. It's not destruction before reconstruction. Without destruction there would be no reconstruction. He just found a path to the light in the darkness. Mu Hongzhi chuckled. Rumble! A terrible rumble rang out in the starry sky, and the galaxy seemed to be turning upside down. Bufang sat cross-legged on the dead star. Holding a spatula, he tossed the wok. The toss seemed to break the sky. Sizzle, sizzle, the sound of steam rising from the wok echoed between heaven and earth. Billowing hot air rose to the sky. The dead star was instantly shrouded by a layer of clouds and mist. Bufang stood in front of the white tiger heaven stove. His hand shook. The ingredients in the wok churned and bloomed with thousands of streams of light. The light was so dazzling that it was dazzling. It was as if the clouds and mist were about to be pushed aside to see the bright moon. Swish! He tossed the wok, and the ingredients flew into the Qilin transmigration ladle. Carefully, he picked up a blue and white porcelain plate. Then, he placed the plate on the stove. Then, he poured the dish in the ladle. Swish! The dish shone brilliantly, and the soup emitted a delicious aroma. It was a dish that smelled delicious just by looking at it. Buzz! Ripples of energy continuously spread out from the dish. Every time it spread out, it would cause the void to tremble. In the sky, Mu Hongzhi and the others widened their eyes. They knew that the most critical moment had come. Looking at the blue and white porcelain bowl, Bufang exhaled softly. He raised his hand and picked up a pair of chopsticks. This was the first dish he had cooked after tasting countless delicacies. It could be said that it had combined all of Bufang's insights into this dish. The flowing soup bloomed with a dazzling golden light. That fragrant aroma made people salivate involuntarily. Bufang reached out his chopsticks, picked up a piece of sweet and sour ribs, and slowly lifted it up. The soup stretched into a long thread. Bufang put the sweet and sour ribs into his mouth. Then, he took a deep breath, clenched his teeth, and chewed. Slurp, slurp. It was very calm, and there were no earth-shattering changes. Bufang opened his eyes. As he chewed the sweet and sour ribs, the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. The aroma flowed in his mouth and filled his mouth. It was as if all the flavors of sourness, sweetness, bitterness, and spiciness rushed to his heart in an instant. Bufang's long-lost senses of taste, smell, and touch all returned in an instant. Invisible energy spread out from Bufang's body. It spread in all directions. At this moment, the deathly silent planet once again glowed with vitality. Tender green branches broke out from the soil and covered the entire planet in an instant. Bufang closed his eyes and swallowed the sweet and sour ribs in his mouth. At that moment, like a stone thrown into a calm pond, it set off monstrous waves. The waves spread and turned into a great flood. Bam! A mighty mental force suddenly spread out from Bufang's body. The sky changed color. Rumble! Suddenly, a terrifying anomaly appeared in the starry sky. Dense thunderclouds covered the sky. Mu Hongzhi, Summer, and the others' eyes shrank, and they all sucked in cold breaths. This is the heaven god tribulation? Down below, Bufang closed his eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up. In his head, the long-lost voice of the system rang out. However, this voice was a little different from before. Chapter 1676. Bufang didn't pay much attention to the heaven god tribulation. His attention was on the long-lost voice of the system. How long had it been since he heard the system's voice? It was a little different from the system's voice in his memory. In the past, the system's voice was solemn and earnest, more like a formulaic statement. However, the tone of the system's voice that rang out at this moment seemed to have a little more spirituality. Yes, it was spirituality. System upgrade completed. System data updating, the system said. However, this voice was a little more lively, like the nagging of a family. Bufang frowned. He stood where he was, his hands moving non-stop as he stuffed the cooked sweet and sour ribs into his mouth. A piece of sweet and sour ribs was soft and tender. His lost sense of taste, touch, and smell all returned at this moment. Suddenly, it was as if he had just had a dream. It was a very real dream. What spread in his mouth was a kind of salty taste with a hint of sourness and sweetness. This was the taste of sweet and sour ribs. The taste of the sweet and sour sauce and the taste of the meat mixed together to create an excellent texture. It was hard to imagine that this was a dish cooked by a chef who had sealed off his sense of taste, smell, and touch. To put it in a more artistic way, this was a dish cooked with heart. It had nothing to do with taste, smell, touch, or even mental force. But to put it simply, it was a work of experience. Bufang used countless years of experience to gather this dish. It broke the shackles and broke the confusion in his heart. In front of his foggy eyes, a bright path was torn open, and a path was opened. This was real cooking with heart. Swish! Bufang stood where he was, immersed in the delicious taste of the food. The dead star under his feet had completely revived, as if it had been reborn. There were flowers and green leaves all over the mountains, and there was a gurgling stream that nourished the star. A star that had been dead for countless years had been revived because of Bufang's dish. The revival of a thought was beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Rumble, thunder rumbled. Layers of clouds rapidly covered the sky, and within the clouds, the nomological laws and the great Tao were constantly spreading. Bufang's actions had already attracted the attention of the laws of the Chaosverse. The law wheel opened up a path in the starry sky, tearing cracks. Bufang had seen a heaven god tribulation once. Back then, the Xiai Divine Emperor had experienced it in the Divine Dynasty. Unfortunately, at that time, he was ambushed. Even the strongest Divine Emperor, the Xiai Divine Emperor, nearly died. In the end, when Bufang took action, it even drew the attention of a heavenly deity. A palm descended, almost obliterating Bufang. Naturally, Bufang would not forget the heavenly god tribulation. System data update complete. Detected that the host is qualified to advance. Do you wish to advance? The system's voice was solemn, but there was a hint of quick-wittedness in it. Bufang's expression remained the same. He clasped his hands behind his back and looked at the boundless sky. After that, he should be in the heavenly god realm. Bufang was also looking forward to this profound realm. System, have you become a spirit? However, Bufang suddenly changed the topic and asked another question. The system was speechless. How can a wise and mighty man like you, who is going to become the god of cooking standing at the top of the starry sky, tease a little system like this? The system asked playfully. If a person were standing in front of him at this moment, that person would probably roll his eyes when he said that. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Sure enough, this system has become a spirit. Or is this the real system? Bufang exhaled. I choose to advance, Bufang said. As soon as he said that, his head rumbled. Rumble. Bufang felt as if his spirit sea was about to explode. In the blink of an eye, everything in front of him turned completely dark. Bufang sank into his spirit sea. Everything in his spirit sea seemed to be in ruins. It looked like a dead star. Is this really my spirit sea? Bufang was in a trance. His spirit sea, which was as vast as a vast sea, had actually dried up? What's going on? Bufang frowned. Or perhaps, all the mental energy in my spirit sea was taken away by the system? As the energy for the system's upgrade? This was the most plausible explanation, rumble. While Bufang was thinking, his spirit sea began to collapse. In an instant the scene disappeared. There was a huge explosion, and countless flames surged in all directions. Then, all kinds of beastly roars rang out. The gray fog, which had concealed the artifact's spirit, slowly drifted over and covered Bufang's spirit sea. Little by little, light bloomed in his mind. The next moment, 1 star, 2 stars, Bufang's spirit sea turned into a sky full of stars, a boundless starry sky. Roar! The golden dragon hovered in the starry sky, looking very magical. The vermilion bird spread its wings and emerged from the fire. The white tiger roared and walked out, 1 step at a time. The black turtle carried the world peak on its back and walked slowly. The qilin soared into the sky, exuding a boundless aura. 5 weapon spirits hovered in the starry sky, guarding every corner of the starry sky with a majestic aura. Each artifact spirit had a pillar of light rising from its body, which represented a supreme law of the universe. It made Bufang's spirit sea extremely stable. It was as solid as a rock, as if it could not be broken at all. Compared with the vast sea of the past, the starry sky today was many times tougher. In the starry sky, stars gathered and constantly turned into strange patterns. Bufang's pupils constricted. Looking at those patterns, he suddenly found them very familiar. Gourmet arrays? Bufang murmured. Yes, the patterns formed by those stars were gourmet arrays. One gourmet array after another occupied Bufang's spirit sea, causing Bufang's aura to rise and stabilizing the originally unstable light beams of the supreme laws of the universe. Each of them had a gourmet array guarding them. Bufang closed his eyes. Then, he slowly opened them. Buzz, his eyes seemed to be bursting with light. The light was dazzling and brilliant. As he opened his eyes, the hearts of Mu Hongzi and the others shook. It was as if the whole starry sky had lit up, a majestic aura descended from the sky. Buzz, at this moment, Bufang's spirit sea was completely restored. My host, you have a system panel that you can check. Can you check it? The system's playful voice rang out. It made Bufang feel goosebumps all over his body. He still found the serious and earnest system more interesting. Check it, Bufang said. As soon as he said that, the system panel floated in front of him. However, it was completely different from the previous one host, Bufang Cultivation Base. Heaven God, still breaking through, cooking skills, quasi-god of cooking exclusive god of cooking's menu, not yet unlocked. Bufang paused when he saw the panel. It looked familiar and strange at the same time. It was so simple that it seemed to be beyond Bufang's expectation. There was a lot of content in the previous panel, about knife skills and many technique. But with a single level up, everything had disappeared. And his cooking skills, what did the quasi-god of cooking mean? Bufang's heart skipped a beat. The word quasi-god of cooking was used well. It meant that he was only one step away from the realm of god of cooking. Host, wake up. There may not be one god of cooking among 10,000 quasi-gods of cooking. Please recognize your position. I don't want to give you too much of a blow, the system said. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Sure enough, the serious and earnest system was more pleasing to him. Now, this system had become a spirit and had even learned how to have a sharp tongue. However, according to the system, the quasi-god of cooking might only be one step closer to the god of cooking realm. At the very least, compared to the hazy state before, it was much clearer now. Bufang felt as if there was a clear path in front of him, and what he had to do was to step onto that path that was full of thorns and mud, all the way to the peak, even if this path is full of hardship and death. System, what does it mean that the god of cooking's menu is not unlocked yet? Bufang was also puzzled and asked the system. This is the function of the system after the upgrade. It is also the main way for the host to improve his strength. The system said. This is the god of cooking's exclusive recipe. Every time you cook a dish that can be recorded in the god of cooking's menu, your strength and realm will be improved. Haven't I already reached the heavenly god realm? Bufang frowned. If he could still improve, what realm would he reach? Surpassing the heavenly god realm? Wasn't that the god of cooking? Host, if you want to know more, please become a heavenly god first, the host said. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Why has the system become so naughty? A naughty system is not a good system. Bufang took a deep breath, and his eyes became clear. He exited the system interface and returned to his body. He stood on the planet. Many of his old friends were watching him in the starry sky. Hades Tenzang, Mu Hongzi, Summer, Dit, and the Realm Lord were all watching Bufang. The Heaven God tribulation was a catastrophic calamity. It could be seen from the tragic state of the Xiai Divine Emperor when he transcended the tribulation. In the chaotic universe, the Heaven Gods did not allow the birth of new Heaven God. If it had not been for Bufang, the Xiai Divine Emperor might have died. Therefore, everyone was curious about how Bufang would deal with the situation. Rumble. Bufang brewed his emotions for a while on the planet. Soon, he rose into the sky. Step by step, he walked toward the starry sky. Thunderclouds came and engulfed him in an instant. Above the thunderclouds, a palace appeared. It was a palace that was condensed from lightning. It exuded an unparalleled terrifying aura. Before Bufang became a heaven god, he already had the strength to fight a saint of the Great Path. In fact, Bufang did not have a specific feeling about his fighting prowess. There must be different levels for heaven god. Just like soul overlords and great soul overlords, as for the levels of heaven gods, Bufang would need to explore them by himself. Rumble. Lightning exploded. The power of the Heaven God tribulation covered almost a quarter of the chaotic universe. Countless experts in the Titan Divine Dynasty, the Xiai Divine Dynasty, and the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty sensed the terrible fluctuation and looked up. In the Xiai Divine Dynasty's palace, the Xiai Divine Emperor's old face twitched. That familiar aura caused his entire body to slightly tremble. This is the Heaven God tribulation. Who is undergoing it again? No matter what, in that instant, the entire Chaosverse seemed to have been thrown into an uproar. Above the thunderclouds, the palace surged. After that, The thunderclouds rumbled. All of a sudden, it was torn apart and the lightning punishment descended. This was blackish-purple lightning. In the primitive universe, it would have a general name: apocalyptic lightning tribulation. Not even chaotic saints dared to touch the thunder tribulation. Compared to the heaven god tribulation that the Shiai divine emperor transcended, it was much stronger. This world-exterminating lightning tribulation was much more powerful than before. It simply didn't give anyone a way out. This also showed how powerful Bufang was. In the thunderclouds, countless lightning soldiers descended. They were filled with killing intent and held divine weapons in their hands. Some wore thunder armor and rode on chariot. Some rode on thunder dragons and shot arrows. In an instant, a world-destroying pressure suddenly descended, making Bufang feel as if he was carrying the entire universe on his back. The faces of Mu Hongzhi and the others changed dramatically, and they retreated to a distance. They didn't dare to touch this kind of tribulation lightly. Otherwise, they would be swept up in it and might even be blasted into ashes in an instant. Mu Hongzhi was the only one present who could withstand the power of this thunder tribulation. As for the others who came into contact with it, they would instantly collapse, and even their souls would be extinguished. That was enough to show how terrifying it was. At this moment, what Bufang was facing was a sea of lightning. Ancient celestial soldiers. The vermilion robe on Bufang shook violently. The next moment, Bufang suddenly burst out laughing. His eyes flickered. He wore the vermilion robe, with the dragon bone knife in his left hand and the Qilin transmigration ladle in his right. He stood on the white tiger stove and the black turtle constellation walk above his head. Bufang was in high spirits. So what if it was a world-ending thunder tribulation? So what if the heavenly deities were spying on them? So what if the laws were crushing them? He would crush them all. With that thought in mind, Bufang laughed heartily and charged into the sea of lightning. Chapter 1677. It was a scene that could destroy the world. Thunder rumbled, and the lightning turned into a human figure. The purple-black lightning tribulation seemed to carry an aura of destruction from the universe, bringing with it an extremely terrible energy. The heaven god tribulation was not just a lightning tribulation. The world-destroying lightning tribulation was only one of them. Purple lightning, purple fire, and purple wind blew from the depths of the universe as if to annihilate everything. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Fortunately, this lightning tribulation would not affect the great world. Otherwise, the netherworld and heaven chief realm would be reduced to ruins. Its power was really terrible. It was as if a real heaven god had descended to destroy everything. In the chaotic universe, it was very difficult to become a heaven god. This tribulation was not something that a god emperor could withstand. How could they withstand it? They couldn't. Each bolt of lightning was like the attack of a heaven god. Bufang laughed. Yes, he was laughing. Of course, that kind of laughter was just opening his mouth, and his face didn't even move. Bufang felt that it was better to laugh at this moment. Transcending the tribulation in high spirits was more dignified than going through it in silence. In the future, if someone asked, he could say that when Bufang was transcending the tribulation, he laughed 3 times, and the lightning tribulation dispersed. It was better than heaven god Bufang's tribulation. He put on a paralyzed face and didn't make a sound. He endured 3,000 bolts of lightning with great difficulty and was almost killed. In many people's eyes, it was better for Bufang not to laugh. Rumble! Tens of thousands of lightning soldiers rushed down from the palace above the lightning. The purple-black lightning carried the power to destroy the world. This kind of power was really terrible. However, Bufang was fearless. He was full of energy now. Boom! The next moment, a lightning spear fell and smashed hard on Bufang. In a flash, Bufang was engulfed by countless bolts of purple lightning. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of thunder colliding shot into his ears and resounded endlessly. At this moment, Heaven and earth became dazzling. Yes, it was the radiance of lightning. The sea of lightning swallowed Bufang, and he went silent. Everyone was dumbfounded. Did it end before it even started? The number one heaven god tribulation in all of eternity was indeed awesome. Mu Hongzhi was also a little taken aback. It's impossible that Bufang can't even block one strike, right? Sure enough, just as these thoughts appeared in his mind, Bufang moved. His body abruptly straightened like a resplendent star, instantly breaking free of the countless lightning shackles. Bang! One by one, Bufang broke free from the thunder chains. The lightning soldiers held their weapons and fought with Bufang. Each lightning soldier was equivalent to a peak-level god king, and these were just the small ones. If it was a lightning soldier with a mount, it would be equivalent to a god emperor. This lineup was simply frightening. No wonder it was called the apocalyptic thunder tribulation. This power was truly terrifying. Bang bang bang! With the dragon bone kitchen knife in his hand, Bufang fought with the lightning soldiers. Who said that chefs couldn't fight? A kitchen knife was also a knife, and when it was waved, its lethality was equally shocking. Poochie! A lightning soldier was cut in half by Bufang. It was simple and violent. Bufang didn't use any divine power or knife technique. To deal with the enemy, he just chopped with the kitchen knife, smashed with the black turtle constellation wok, and smacked with the Chilan transmigration ladle. One by one, the lightning soldiers were beheaded, their bodies were smashed, and their chests exploded. Then, they crumbled and turned into purple lightning arcs that darted away. Unfortunately, after killing one, there was another. More and more lightning soldiers piled up and swallowed Bufang's figure. There were probably tens of thousands of them. It was truly terrifying to fight one against 10,000. The crowd fell silent as they looked at Bufang, who seemed to be drowned in a sea of lightning, and kept struggling. Even a little bit of this tribulation could kill them, but Bufang was fearlessly moving about in the sea of lightning. It was truly amazing. Realm Lord Dit and Hades Tenzang fell silent. Had Bufang grown to such a level without them noticing? How long had it been? It turned out that there was really such a genius in the world. Mu Hongzhi's eyes were filled with amazement. As a host, perhaps he was the only one who knew how amazing Bufang was. Even among the hosts, Bufang's excellence was hard to conceal. This expressionless junior might really be able to create a miracle and reach a height that even he had never reached before. It was something that many chefs dreamed of. But before that, Bufang needed to resist the heaven god tribulation. Boom! Bufang was forced to retreat. His knife kept stabbing into the lightning warrior's body. The battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. On this day, the whole great netherworld was filled with the rumbling of thunder. The starry sky at night was even brighter than the day. The Xiaoyi Divine Emperor, Xiao Yanyu, the Titan Crown Prince, and the others all flew over. How could such fluctuations not attract their attention? This was a heaven god tribulation, which only appeared once in the chaotic universe. Only those with extraordinary talent were qualified to trigger it. Bufang cut a path through the lightning soldiers that filled the sky. In the distance, a lightning general riding a winged dragon locked his eyes on Bufang with a spear in his hand. Rumble! Bufang laughed with an expressionless face, then rushed forward. Boom! The lightning-winged dragon flapped its wings and sped toward Bufang at lightning speed. A spear pierced through Bufang's dragon bone kitchen knife and stabbed his vermilion robe. With a ripping sound, it went right through his body. Bufang took several steps back as he was hit by the tremendous force. Bam! He stomped on the starry sky, and the thunderclouds seemed to scatter. Bufang steadied himself, his eyes cold. This was a difficult path, but he would kill anyone who tried to stop him. The dragon bone kitchen knife slashed down, shattering the lightning spear. The remaining half of the spear was still in Bufang's body. Slash! With a swing of the black turtle constellation wok, the lightning general and the winged dragon were smashed into a ball of lightning by Bufang. rumble. Bolts of lightning shot toward Bufang. In the distance, the lightning soldiers cleared a path, revealing a dozen lightning generals riding winged dragons. Each of these lightning generals had a fluctuating aura. A battle was about to break out. Bufang fought the lightning generals. Slash. Slash. The lightning spears kept stabbing into Bufang's body. Blood spattered and dyed his vermilion robe red. Purple lightning arcs danced as if to paralyze Bufang's body. However, Bufang's surging blood energy had broken through the paralysis of the lightning. Bufang shook his head and exhaled. His body was pierced by numerous lightning spears. Host, you can do it. Host, you can do it. As the god of cooking who wants to stand at the peak of the starry sky, beat them. In his head, the system's cheering voice rang out. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. The serious system was more likable. At least, it wasn't so noisy. Boom. Bufang's body shook. Instantly, the lightning spears piercing his body were broken. Bufang took a deep breath. In the distance, the densely packed thunder soldiers once again surrounded them. Bufang let out a long cry. Immediately, the golden dragon, vermilion bird, black turtle, white tiger, and Qilin rushed out from behind him, attacking the lightning soldiers. With the help of the artifact spirits, the pressure on Bufang was greatly reduced. The purple flames spread out, and the scorching heat caused the void to distort. Bufang focused his eyes and snapped his fingers. Immediately, a scarlet divine flame emerged. It was the divine flame that had merged with the primordial fire of the human race. As soon as it appeared, it suppressed the purple flame and even swallowed it like a greedy beast. Perhaps even the heaven god Tribulation did not expect this. If fire could not do it, wind would come. The purple wind blew rapidly, as if it came from the depths of the starry sky. As the wind blew, flesh and bones seemed to be separated. It was the wind of nirvana, a wind that could even shatter souls. In the face of the wind, Bufang was fearless and kept moving forward. Swish, the vermilion robe kept fluttering in the wind. The 5 artifact spirits were still fighting, and countless lightning soldiers were being extinguished. Bufang felt that the connection between him and the artifact spirits was getting closer and closer. Fighting side by side with them had deepened his understanding of the god of cooking set. Perhaps this was an improvement in his understanding of the spiritual level above the lightning. The wheel of law emerged. It was the manifestation of the laws of the universe. The power of law was projected into the lightning, and then 5 figures stepped out of it. They were 5 existences clad in lightning armors, entangled in the lightning. They represented the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Mu Hongzhi, the Xiai Divine Emperor, and the others all frowned. This heaven god Tribulation is strange. It's making things difficult for Owner Bu. The Xiai Divine Emperor said solemnly. The Xiai Divine Emperor said solemnly. As someone who had transcended a heaven god Tribulation, he knew very well what it was like. No matter how terrible it was, there should not be so many tribulations. Tens of thousands of lightning soldiers, god emperor-level lightning generals, and now there was a lightning commander who comprehended the supreme laws of the universe. The lightning of destruction, the wind of nirvana, the fire of all things, these were all extremely terrifying cosmic energies. If it were someone else, even a top god emperor would have died. Even an ordinary god emperor would not have been able to withstand such power. Even an ordinary saint of the Great Path would not have been able to withstand such power. Could it be that someone is deliberately harming Owner Bu with a lightning tribulation of this level? Is he not allowed to break through? That was what everyone thought. Mu Hongzhi frowned. What the Xiai Divine Emperor and the others said made sense. Even though Bufang had the system and great opportunities, it was impossible for him to encounter a lightning tribulation of this level, right? It was simply not giving him a way out. The aura of the lightning marshal transformed from the 5 supreme laws of the universe was extremely terrifying. It was almost comparable to that of Soul 13 and an ordinary saint of the Great Path. With Bufang's current state, it was very difficult for him to deal with an existence of this level. However, Bufang did not retreat. Holding the wok and the knife, he did not say anything. Instead, he burst out laughing and rushed up. He fought the lightning marshal, who had comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Bufang's supreme laws of the universe kept spreading out from time to time. He was having a great time fighting. Bufang was really strong. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others had to admit that. The weak chef from back then had now grown to the peak of this world. His strength was almost no weaker than that of a heaven god. Blood sprayed out of Bufang's mouth. His vermilion robe was in tatters, but it was constantly repairing itself. He was coughing up blood, and his body was charred by the lightning bolt. However, he did not retreat. He had killed 3 of the lightning marshals, who had comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe. Now only 2 were left. The lightning marshals had no emotions. They only knew how to attack and kill with every strike, and they had mastered the supreme laws of the universe. However, they had beaten Bufang to a sorry state. Bufang's energy and blood were extremely weak. They were almost extinguished. All the lightning soldiers around him were blown away. The artifact spirits had also returned to Bufang's spirit sea. The violent panting seemed to linger in everyone's ears. All eyes were fixed on Bufang, who was standing under the thunderclouds, and they were all silent. Bufang shook his head. The next moment, he flipped his hand. Cooking ingredients flew out. Under the bombardment of thousands of lightning bolts, Bufang was cooking in the sea of lightning. The oil boiled and the ingredients flew. The Qilin transmigration ladle spun in Bufang's hand. Although Bufang looked very miserable at the moment, when it came to cooking, Bufang was full of energy. The ingredients were stacked on the Qilin transmigration ladle, and the milky white sauce covered the ingredient. The oil in the wok was boiling and splashing. Sizzle! The ingredients in the Qilin transmigration ladle fell into the wok and immediately tumbled. Smack! 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 Bufang slapped the wok. Pieces of oyster pancakes flashing with lightning bolts and bursting with energy flew up. They were grabbed by Bufang and stuffed into his mouth. He was cooking oyster pancakes in the sea of lightning. The oyster pancakes, which carried lightning bolts, were eaten by Bufang. It was as if lightning bolts were scouring his body. Bufang's energy and blood, which had fallen silent, suddenly boiled. Bufang's face glowed again as he charged toward the 3 lightning marshals. Even though the law of time, the law of space, and the law of transmigration spread, none of them could stop Bufang. Rumble! Rumble! Finally, under Bufang's black wok, the 3 lightning marshals were crushed to pieces. Bufang roared and rose to his feet. At this point, all the lightning soldiers, lightning generals, and lightning marshals were destroyed. The heaven god tribulation was finally over. So what if heaven was jealous of him? Bufang proved with his actions that a black wok could smash the sky. The thunderclouds in the sky were still slowly dispersing. The palaces seemed to be vanishing. The heaven god tribulation was finally over. In the distance, everyone's suspenseful hearts were finally at ease. Suddenly, a smile bloomed on Mu Hongxi's beautiful face. The Xiai Divine Emperor had a complicated look in his eyes. Suddenly, someone froze. Bufang, with the corners of his mouth curled upward, frowned. Leaning on the black wok, he raised his head and looked up at the sky. There, in the starry sky, the center of the dissipating thunderclouds spun slowly and turned into a huge thundercloud vortex. And from within the thundercloud vortex, there seemed to be a majestic figure standing in it. Rumble! A terrible aura spread in an instant, making everyone hold their breath. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others were stunned. This is a heaven god. The Xiai Divine Emperor's pupils constricted as he sucked in a cold breath. Bufang narrowed his eyes. He looked at the heaven god. The heaven god's face was wooden as he stood in the thundercloud vortex. The next moment, slowly, he reached out his hand. In the starry sky, thousands of energies gathered and turned into a palm. Then he threw a palm straight at Bufang. Chapter 1678. Rumble. The entire starry sky seemed to be trembling. That terrifying palm slammed down from the depths of the vortex-shaped thunderclouds, shattering the sky. This palm smashed the silence in everyone's hearts, causing countless people to be horrified. A heaven god! How could it be a heaven god? A heaven god is attacking again? Everyone exclaimed. Those who had experienced the Xiai Divine Emperor's heaven god tribulation were all horrified. That time, the same thing had happened. At that time, a heaven god had slapped down from the depths of the thunderclouds to kill Bufang. And now, the same scene had happened again. What was the grudge between a heaven god and Bufang? If that time was because Bufang secretly devoured the laws, what about this time? This time, Bufang had transcended his heaven god tribulation. Why would a heaven god kill him again? At this moment, the Xiai Divine Emperor and the others thought of many things. Mu Hongzhi narrowed his eyes. He resisted the urge to attack because he knew he could not. The heaven god tribulation was not over yet, and once he attacked, he would be doomed eternally. Don't worry. Bufang will be fine, Mu Hongzhi said with a smile as he glanced at the nervous Summer beside him. Summer, Dit, and the others breathed sighs of relief. Mu Hongzhi was so beautiful that he would not lie. Bufang was in a very bad state at the moment. His body was exhausted, and the wound pierced by the lightning spear had dried up. Not even blood could flow out. If he hadn't eaten an oyster pancake just now, he might not have been able to hold on now. The heaven god tribulation this time was a little more powerful than he had expected. Compared with the Xiai Divine Emperor's heaven god tribulation, it was nothing. Rumble, the heaven god in the depths of the thunderclouds, stood tall. He threw out a palm, which rumbled and emitted a terrible fluctuation. The palm sent a chill down everyone's spines. This was a heaven god, a veteran heaven god of the chaotic universe. Even Soul 13 would not have been able to withstand this palm strike. You again. Bufang suddenly raised his head, narrowed his eyes, and said coldly. That's right, it was that heavenly deity again. The aura of this heavenly deity was something that Bufang would never be able to forget. It was this heaven god who had shattered his god of cooking set with a palm. However, the current him was no longer the same as before. However, Bufang did not understand why this sky god would try to kill him over and over again. Rumble. That palm swept across the stars, causing countless stars to explode. The oppressive aura was so oppressive that the netherworld almost collapsed. Fortunately, Mu Hongzhi intervened and stabilized the netherworld. The attack of a heavenly deity was different from a lightning tribulation. That kind of fluctuation was enough to destroy the world. Could he block it? Everyone's heart tightened. That was a heavenly god. The attack of a heavenly deity carried a sure-kill effect. Bufang was covered in wounds, and the recovery speed of his vermilion robe could not keep up with the speed of his injuries. He was like an arrow at the end of its flight, so it was hard to tell how he would fare against the heaven god's palm. Perhaps he would really be obliterated. However, Bufang was not willing to give up. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. Rumble. The god of cooking sets fell to the ground. This star, which had been deathly still but was now brimming with life, shook violently. Bufang took a deep breath. Looking at the palm coming from the starry sky, Bufang shook his Tautai arm. Yin and Yang energy swirled around it, and the 8 trigrams array was spinning in his palm. The black and white Tautais rushed out, roaring at the sky. As Bufang's strength improved, so did the black and white Tautais. After merging with the 8 trigrams array, the power of the Tautai arm became even stronger. Bufang stepped on the star. His fist flashed with dazzling light as he soared into the sky. Facing the heaven god's palm, he punched back fearlessly. Boom! The fist and the palm collided in the starry sky. The thunderclouds seemed to be blown away. The thunderbolt palaces in the sky were connected, but at this moment, they all exploded and scattered all over the ground. Bufang spurted a mouthful of blood. The yin and yang energy swirled to the extreme, and the 8 trigrams array flashed with dazzling light. The black and white tout eyes turned real, biting and tearing at the heaven god's palm. The rumbling sounds of collision caused the heavens and earth to turn silent. Everyone was dumbstruck. Boom! A moment later, the black and white tout eyes roared, exploding together with the sky palaces. Bufang's body fell on the star like a cannonball. The star collapsed, creating a deep pit. Bufang's body almost pierced through the star. In the sky, the heavenly deity's arm began to crumble. It continued to crumble until it disappeared like smoke. The heaven god's palm was blocked by Bufang's swoosh. Rubble flew everywhere. Bufang climbed out of the star. His hair was disheveled and his face was covered in dust, but his face was as expressionless as ever. A chaotic saint-level heaven god, Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. After the collision just now, Bufang sensed the power of the heaven god's attack, which was at the level of a chaotic saint. Its aura was stronger than Sueren's. Clearly, it was a veteran chaotic saint. In the face of a chaotic saint, Bufang was still a little weak. Even Bufang, the pride great soul overlord, was almost killed in an instant. Bufang could fight against an ordinary saint of the Great Path, but he had no hope against a chaotic saint. However, the heaven god did not kill him this time. Next time, Bufang would definitely go back and get revenge. There was an old saying that went, "The river flows east for 30 years, and then west for 30 years, Bufang's eyes narrowed. The heaven god was a little surprised that his attack had failed. He had failed the last time and now he had failed again. He was really surprised. However, since he had failed, the heaven god would not attack again. He had already violated the rules of the universe by attacking again, and he would suffer the backlash of the laws. Therefore, the heaven god stopped attacking. In any case, the power that seeped out of his palm was enough to torture that guy for a long time, and it could even completely cripple that mortal. "You're really lucky, but you won't live for long," said the heaven god, standing in the slowly dissipating thundercloud vortex. His voice rang through heaven and earth. There was no doubt that he was talking to Bufang. Bufang looked up expressionlessly. Blood was dripping from the corners of his mouth. He did not say anything but just looked indifferently at the heaven god. He watched as the heaven god's figure gradually faded away. The latter seemed to be about to disappear into the thundercloud again and return to the chaos. "No matter what the reason is, if you want to kill me," Bufang sighed. "In any case, I'll remember this. Just you wait. I'll come to you soon," Bufang said. The heaven god sneered. "You'd better resist the erosion of my divine power first. Otherwise, you won't be able to come to see me." The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He gave the heaven god a cold look. Then, without saying a word, he raised his hand and clenched his fist. His middle finger popped out, pointing straight at the sky. "Get lost," Bufang said in a low voice. The heaven god's face turned cold, and he flew into a rage. As a heaven god, the ruler of the chaotic universe, when had he ever suffered such an insult? However, he had no time to do anything else. His body slowly disappeared. The thundercloud in the sky also slowly dispersed. Buzz, the wheel of law appeared once again, and streaks of energy and light streaks shot down. Those streams of energy fused into Bufang's body and kept healing Bufang's injuries. Bufang sat cross-legged on the star, feeling the baptism of the power of law. His baptism was much purer than that of the Xiai Divine Emperor. The Xiai Divine Emperor was only baptized by one law, but Bufang was different. Bufang received 5 laws. The 5 laws scoured Bufang's body. The scouring was, in fact, quite damaging to his fleshly body. It felt as if all his bones and flesh were going to be washed away. Strange energy fluctuations spread from Bufang's body. The Xiai Divine Emperor and many other top-grade god kings landed. They sat cross-legged on the star that had regained its vitality. Sensing the energy fluctuations spreading from Bufang's body, they closed their eyes. Bufang had gained a lot, but they could also sense the opportunity. The vermilion robe soon returned to its original state. Bufang's wounds also disappeared. As the power of law washed over him, Bufang's body seemed to become a little hazy. Behind his head, there seemed to be a five-colored disk formed by the power of law emerging. Transcending the heaven god tribulation did not necessarily mean that one could become a heaven god. A heaven god was the pinnacle of a chaotic universe, and one's comprehension of power and laws had to be mastered to the extreme. Even the system could not help Bufang break through to the heaven god realm immediately. It took him a long time to comprehend. Bufang sat cross-legged on the star, followed by the other god kings. Many of them had improved their comprehension, and their auras had become stronger. The power of law lingering around Bufang had benefited many of them. Those were the supreme laws of the universe. It was even more difficult for Bufang to comprehend them and become a heaven god. Others only needed to comprehend one law, but he needed to comprehend 5. Of course, without the gourmet array, it would have been really difficult for Bufang to comprehend them. However, with the gourmet array and the 5 artifact spirits, it was not as difficult for Bufang to break through to the heaven god realm as others had imagined. Time passed slowly. Day after day passed. Mu Hongzhi and the others also stayed on the planet with lives. They were waiting for Bufang's recovery. Finally, on a certain day, Bufang opened his eyes. The moment he opened his eyes, a 7-colored brilliance appeared in the sky. It was as if a colorful phoenix had flown past, and it was as if a divine dragon had slithered past. All kinds of unusual phenomena emerged in the starry sky. The flowers on the entire planet bloomed and swayed, as if they were about to produce a pleasant melody. The other god kings who had been lost in thought woke up and looked respectfully at Bufang. They all looked up at the 5 dots of light that had emerged in the sky. Those 5 light spots were like 5 extremely resplendent divine cores. Those are heaven god causality impositions. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back, his long hair fluttering in the wind. Everyone around him sucked in a cold breath. 5 heaven god causality impositions have all been occupied. How can Bufang achieve his goal? Unless he forcibly removes a heaven god or creates a new causality imposition. Mu Hongzhi heaved a sigh. There were only 5 heaven gods in the chaotic universe, and it could only accommodate 5 heaven god. What would Bufang do? Mu Hongzhi's eyes rested on Bufang in the distance, lost in thought. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others clearly knew the secret of the heaven gods. Solemn expressions appeared on their faces. At this stage, if Bufang failed because of a lack of qualifications, it would be very frustrating. Look! Realm Lord Dit suddenly exclaimed. Some people who were lost in thought paused. The next moment they looked up at the sky. There, the wheel of law was rumbling, shooting out the power of the law. Apart from that, 4 of the 5 star-like Tao immortals radiated with energy. Accompanied by the power of the law, the energy condensed into a brand new 5-colored causality imposition next to the 5 star-like causality impositions. What's going on? Many people were stunned. Mu Hongzhi's eyes lit up. 4 heaven gods have selflessly given some of their causality impositions energy to help Bufang form his causality imposition. This is breaking the laws of the universe. Why are those 4 heaven gods helping Bufang? However, they could not figure it out, and it was not up to them to figure it out. The moment the causality imposition took shape, Bufang's eyes snapped open. The vermilion bird, the white tiger, the golden dragon, the black turtle, and the qilin, all of them flew around Bufang. Even the gourmet array hovered around him. The causality imposition shone brightly. A five-colored beam of light fell from it and shot into Bufang's forehead. Slowly, a five-colored divine crystal formed between Bufang's brows. The crystal vibrated and emanated boundless energy, which gradually made Bufang's aura more profound and supreme. On this day, under the witness of the crowd, Bufang, he had become a heaven god. Chapter 1679. He had become a heaven god. There wasn't anything sensational happening. It was as quiet as a flower blooming. But even if it was a flower, it was a beautiful flower. Bufang opened his eyes. His body was covered in a rosy glow, causing his injuries and aura to instantly recover to a perfect state. His skin had become crystal clear, as tender as a young girl's. His skin made Mu Hongzhi jealous. If he had known that breaking through to the heaven god realm could beautify his skin, he would have given it a try. However, the most excited ones were none other than the Xiaoyi Divine Emperor and the others. They had witnessed a miracle with their own eyes. The birth of a heaven god had a special meaning to the chaotic universe. What did this mean? It meant that it was not impossible to become a heaven god. Even if one of the five causality thrones was already a heaven god, the new heaven god could still find another path and walk his own path. Everyone looked up at the sky. Even though Bufang's causality throne was dim and could not be compared to those veteran heaven gods, Bufang had, after all, carved out a path for himself. He had walked this path, and all he needed to do now was to consolidate it. Countless flowers were blooming where Bufang sat, trees were swaying, and the spiritual energy in the air was extremely rich. It had only taken him a few days to go from a dead planet to a planet with lives where people could cultivate. This was a planet that gave birth to a heaven god. Putting everything else aside, just the sound of the laws contained in it was enough to benefit countless people. The Xiaoyi Divine Emperor's eyes turned red, and so did many god kings. Looking at the planet, all that was left in their hearts was desire. The Xiaoyi Divine Emperor had even thought of bringing this planet under his rule. No one can touch it. This planet belongs to the great netherworld. Mu Hongzhi clasped his hands behind his back and squinted at the Xiaoyi Divine Emperor and the others. The Xiaoyi Divine Emperor was displeased. The great netherworld also belongs to the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty. So this planet also belongs to the Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty. The Xiaoyi Divine Emperor's voice was full of vigor. What he said was a fact. He had been wondering where Mu Hongzhi had gone. So it turned out that he had come to this corner. However, what he said was the truth. The Xiaoyi Divine Dynasty was vast, and the great netherworld indeed belonged to it. If Mu Hongzhi hadn't killed the emissary sent by the Divine Emperor to manage the great netherworld, the netherworld would still be under the Divine Emperor's control. Mu Hongzhi paused. He suddenly realized that he really could not find any reason to refute the Divine Emperor. This old scoundrel. However, this planet with lives was the closest to the netherworld, so it would be the netherworld that benefited from it. Mu Hongzhi had made up his mind. He planned to move the entire Heaven Chief realm to this planet. This planet had given birth to a heavenly god. Just the will of laws and the aura of the great Tao that the heavenly god had left behind was enough to prove that this planet was extraordinary. In the future, if this star gave birth to life, these life forms would all be extremely intelligent existences. This was the status and significance of a heavenly god. Just the aura he casually exuded was enough to change a part of the world. Bufang was naturally unaware of their quarrel. He closed his eyes and sensed his own aura. The system had upgraded, and many things were different from before. Moreover, Bufang sensed that the restrictions and restraints the system had placed on his cultivation base had completely disappeared. If Bufang wanted to cultivate and make a breakthrough now, it would no longer be a problem of turnover. That was normal. If he could make a breakthrough as long as he accumulated enough turnover when he reached the level of a heavenly god, that would be too much of a cheat. Bufang's spirit sea had turned into a starry sky. The densely packed stars shone brightly, and each star would provide him with an inexhaustible supply of mental energy. His current mental force was much stronger than when he was in the state of the vast sea. With the 5 artifact spirits guarding the starry sky, together with the gourmet array and the beams of law, Bufang's spirit sea was extremely vast. With just a thought, he could destroy a planet and completely shatter it. He could summon the power of laws at will. This was the power of a heavenly god. Once he spoke, the law would follow. The god of cooking's menu was gone. It seemed to have assimilated with his spirit sea, and all the energy had seeped into it. The true form of his divine sense had also disappeared. However, as long as Bufang wanted to, he could condense it with a thought. In fact, Bufang could even condense the true form of his divine sense from 10,000 miles away, and he could even possess a lot of the fighting strength of his true form. The heavenly god realm was indeed a brand new realm. Perhaps it was because he had just become a heavenly god, but Bufang felt that something was pulling him. It was a very strange feeling. When he closed his eyes, he could see a huge turbid yellow vortex in front of him, spinning as if to draw his soul into it. Bufang's current cultivation base was probably at the peak of the Saint of the Great Path, close to the level of a chaotic saint. He was still some distance away from those real veteran heavenly gods. The heavenly god who attacked him before should be a chaotic saint heavenly god. However, Bufang had just broken through. As long as he was given enough time to recuperate, he would definitely be able to break through to the level of a chaotic saint in the future. After thinking for so long, Bufang rose to his feet. The god of cooking set turned into beams of light and flew into Bufang's body. Behind his head, there was a faintly discernible rainbow-colored halo. It was the symbol of his cultivation base, and it was the manifestation of the laws. All veteran heavenly gods would have such a halo behind their heads. However, Bufang's halo was not obvious, because Bufang did not deliberately manifest it. One figure after another descended from the sky. This life star was as beautiful as a fairyland in the mortal world. Flowers bloomed like a brocade, 7-colored and splendid. Bufang glanced around the whole planet. It had absorbed his heavenly god aura and was the place where he became a god. Its significance was extraordinary, and its status had changed. In the future, it would surely become a place that future generations would look up to. "Let's call it the Nirvana planet," said Bufang. Mu Hongzhi descended. Bufang glanced at him. In the past, Bufang could not see through Mu Hongzhi, but now he could roughly sense his cultivation base. He was a little weaker than his current self. However, he still had the cultivation base and fighting prowess of a saint of the Great Path. This was normal. After all, Mu Hongzhi was the previous host, so it was normal for his strongest fighting prowess to be at this level. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others landed as well. They looked excitedly at Bufang. The Xiai Divine Emperor even bowed to Bufang. Now, Bufang's identity had completely changed. He had become the supreme heavenly god of this part of the world. "Greetings, heavenly god Bufang." The Xiai Divine Emperor was very excited. Behind him were several god kings, who were also looking at Bufang feverishly. Realm Lord Dit, Summer, and other acquaintances landed as well. Bufang nodded. Then, his eyes fell on Realm Lord Dit. At this moment, Dit's body was illusory. This was the body he had condensed, and he had become one with the great path of the Heaven Chief Realm. In fact, strictly speaking, he was already dead. Of course, because he was entrusted to the Great Path, his consciousness was still alive, and he had even gained a lot of strength. Bufang took a deep breath. He raised his hand. A crimson flame emerged. It could now be called the Heaven God Flame. With the 5 supreme laws of the universe fused into it, it emitted a peerless aura. Suddenly, the crimson flame changed, and the law of life took over. A boundless aura of life flowed around it. Bufang casually grabbed a handful of soil from the ground of the planet with lives. He sprinkled it into the flame. The powerful aura of life immediately burned the soil and changed its appearance. The soil kept growing and turning into a human figure. Bufang flicked his finger and a spark fell into it. Buzz, a brand new physical body appeared. Realm Lord Dit was excited. Bufang was condensing a body for him. Bufang waved his hand and Realm Lord Dit's will turned and fell into the body. Buzz, the body opened its eyes, and a mighty aura spread out in an instant, accompanied by a terrifying aura of life. Bufang not only helped Realm Lord Dit condense a body, but also helped Dit comprehend the law of life. Now, Realm Lord Dit could cultivate to at least the level of a top-grade God King, and it was not impossible for him to break through to the God Emperor realm. Thank you, little Boo Boo. Realm Lord Dit was extremely excited. Looking at his body, he felt as if he had gotten a new toy. Your soul has fused with the Great Path. Although this body can't help you separate completely, it is at least your main clone. It can be said that it has given you another life. Even if this body collapses, you won't die because your soul is in the Heaven Chief realm. However, it is inevitable that you will be seriously injured and fall into a deep sleep. Bufang said. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Helping an old friend was something that he did not object to. Then, Bufang copied Boo Boo Boo's method and condensed another body. This body was condensed for Hades Tenzang. However, when he took out Hades Tenzang's body, the starry sky changed instantly. A huge black hole appeared, twisting and spinning. It was transmigration. Bufang narrowed his eyes, staring at the black hole. In this transmigration, he felt a familiar aura. So it's him. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. The heaven god who had attacked him had an aura very similar to that of the black hole, so they should be of the same origin. If his guess was right, he should be heaven god transmigration. However, Bufang still did not understand why heaven god transmigration tried to kill him again and again. There must be a reason. Hades Tenzang's soul flew out. As soon as he appeared, he was sensed by the transmigration. A thread connected to Tian Tsang's body entered the transmigration. Like a huge monster, the transmigration opened its mouth and stared at Hades Tenzang. Bufang narrowed his eyes. The crimson flame in his hand began to burn. His aura changed from a flame full of life to a flame full of transmigration. Boom! As the flame burned, the transmigration thread that entangled Hades Tenzang was burned off. Bufang seemed to sense the reincarnation wheel's furious aura. Bufang was fearless. Since Tian Tsang did not give him face, why should Bufang care about it? He had already given him the middle finger. Why should he care about morality? Holding Hades Tenzang's soul, Bufang stuffed it into the body that had reformed. Buzz, the transmigration disappeared. Hades Tenzang had been completely resurrected. Feeling the living body, Hades Tenzang choked with sobs for a moment. He's finally alive. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others were filled with awe and horror. After becoming a heaven god, Bufang's means were truly invincible. He could not believe that he had come back to life from heaven god transmigration. Boo! Heaven god Boo, where did my son Era go? Hades Tenzang, wrapped in a black robe, asked hopefully as he looked at Bufang. Bufang paused for a moment, then shook his head. He did not know. It's okay. I'll find him and bring him back to see you. He should be very happy that you are resurrected. Bufang said faintly. Hades Tenzang could not say anything, so he just nodded. However, he was still a little worried and concerned. A mother would worry about her son when he traveled 1,000 miles, and so would a father. He did not need Era to have any mighty strength. All he needed was for him to be safe. Then I'll leave it to you, Heaven God, Hades Tenzang said. Bufang had helped him reform his body, and his accumulation was about to burst out. If he returned to seclusion, he could even break through to the God King level in one fell swoop. How could the physical body of a heavenly god be a joke? What about me? I don't ask for much. I just want to make my skin fairer and more tender. Mu Hongzhi blinked his big beautiful eyes and looked at Bufang. Bufang glanced at Mu Hongzhi and raised his hand. With a wave of his hand, a scarlet-red flame ignited in his palm. No problem. Put your chin on my palm. Come on, don't stand on ceremony. Bufang said faintly. Mu Hongzhi's face froze. He glanced at the flame that was burning so fiercely that it seemed to be able to burn even the void. He hesitated and hesitated. Forget it. I'm the prettiest man in the world. I'm fine now. Mu Hongzhi shook his head. What a joke. Who knows if that chin will be plastic surgery or disfigurement? Oh, by the way, Bufang, now that you are a heaven god, there's something I should tell you. The calamity of the soul demons could not have happened for no reason. There must be a reason why the soul demons appeared. Perhaps the passage between the soul demon universe and the chaotic universe was torn, but I couldn't find it no matter how hard I tried. Now you should be able to find it, Mu Hongzhi said suddenly, looking at Bufang. This matter was very serious. If he could not find it, the calamity of the soul demons would happen again. Bufang paused for a moment, then he nodded. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others also grew serious. The calamity of the soul demons was a great calamity for them. Bufang moved. With his hands clasped behind him, the colorful light disk behind him flashed. As if stepping on an invisible staircase, he stepped into the starry sky. With his hands clasped behind his back, his mental force surged out. In a flash, it spread out in all directions of the chaotic universe. Buzz, everyone felt an invisible wave enveloping their bodies. The Light Wind Empire, the Abyss, the Heaven Chief Realm, the Xiai Divine Dynasty, the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty, the Titan Divine Dynasty, all the divine dynasties were enveloped by Bufang's mental force. His mental force seemed to reach every corner of the universe. Oh! Suddenly, Bufang raised his eyebrows and a fierce look came into his eyes. Found it. Chapter 1680. Found it. Bufang did not use his innate divine ability, the god of cooking's eye. With his current cultivation base, once he used it, he could see through the universe with a glance. He just spread his mental force and saw the place where the soul demon had entered the chaotic universe. After the disappearance of his mental force, Bufang's spirit sea became stronger and stronger like a phoenix rising from the ashes. It was as if there was a universe in his mind. Perhaps the other heaven gods were no match for Bufang in terms of mental force. Bufang landed on the ground. He did not go over immediately. Mu Hongzhi and the others were looking at him. Bufang should be able to solve this problem now. In fact, what Mu Hongzhi said was not a trivial matter. Soul demons were a disaster for any universe. Their nature was to devour and destroy everything. This was evident from the calamity of the soul demons. After Bufang became a heaven god, he would have to leave the chaotic universe, for there was no heaven god in the chaotic universe. According to the records in the Xiai Divine Dynasty's books, whether it was the ancient heaven god or the modern-day heaven god who comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe, they had all shattered the void and left the chaotic universe. As for where they went, no one knew. If Bufang had left the chaotic universe as well, once the soul demons made a comeback, Mu Hongzhi was probably the only one who could stop them. The appearance of an even more terrifying soul demon or soul overlord would be a complete nightmare for the chaotic universe. Come, let's go and have a look. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back. After becoming a heaven god, his temperament seemed colder, and he looked more majestic. As soon as his voice rang out, Bufang waved his hand casually. Everyone's vision blurred. In the next moment, he discovered that he had appeared in a shattered meteorite ring. The broken meteorites were spinning slowly, densely packed like a forest. They were standing on a flat meteorite. The great spatial teleportation, the Xiai Divine Emperor's heart skipped a beat. What Bufang had just shown was the legendary Great Spatial Teleportation, which was a supreme technique on par with large-scale teleportation arrays. As expected of a heavenly deity, his face was not red nor was he out of breath after a single major shift. It was the same logic as an ordinary person climbing 20 floors in one go without losing any breath. Everyone shifted their gaze and looked into the distance. Only then did they have the time to pay attention to their surroundings. Where is this place? The spiritual energy is so thin. This must be an abandoned meteorite ring. This is the abandoned land. No living creatures can live here. Many people began to mutter. The people present were all knowledgeable, so they naturally recognized this place. However, as they spoke, their voices suddenly became softer. That was because in the center of the asteroid ring was a pitch-black crack. On the meteorite fragments around the fissure, there was a black ball attached to each meteorite fragment, beating like a heart. Those who had gone through the calamity of the soul demons naturally knew what it was. It's really a soul demon. A god king's face turned pale as he looked at the dense black balls. Just when they thought all the soul demons had been expelled, there were so many soul demon eggs here. What a treacherous soul demon! This place is almost a dead zone for all living beings. Who would have thought that there would be so many soul demons here? A god king said with a lingering fear. If Bufang had not discovered them and allowed them to grow, there might have been another calamity. And this time, without Bufang, could they really survive? Tisk, tsk. I can't believe they are hiding here. Mu Hongzhi smacked his lips and narrowed his eyes slightly. He had been searching for a long time, wanting to get rid of them in one fell swoop, but he failed to find them. This is a small spatial rift, and the soul demon universe is at the other end of it, Bufang said. This was the first time he had been so close to the soul demon universe. Bufang even had an impulse to go into the soul demon universe through the rift. However, he suppressed the impulse. Now was not the time to go to the soul demon universe. Besides, Bufang did not know what was in the soul demon universe. Although one Pride Great Soul Overlord was killed, there were still 6 Great Soul Overlords left, each of whom was at the level of a chaotic saint. Even Bufang did not dare to underestimate them. Not to mention that there was the even more terrifying Soul God in the Soul Demon universe. He did not say anything. Bufang thought for a moment, then suddenly twitched the corner of his mouth. With a flip of his hand, the god of cooking set emerged. The dragon bone kitchen knife, the black turtle constellation wok, and the Chilan transmigration ladle all floated around him. That gave everyone pause. What was Bufang going to do? But looking at his posture, even a fool could tell what he was going to do. He was going to cook. When Bufang took out the ingredients, everyone was stunned. The extremely terrifying pressure and aura made everyone's hair stand on end. Mu Hongzhi's pupils constricted. Are these Soul Overlord ingredients? Mu Hongzhi looked at Bufang. Where did Bufang get these ingredients? Soul 13? Soul 13's aura was not so terrifying. Yes, what Bufang took out now was the fleshly body of Pride Great Soul Overlord. It was a chaotic saint-level ingredient. With a spin of the dragon bone kitchen knife, Bufang began to process the ingredients. He peeled the skin and pulled out the tendons. His movements were as smooth as flowing water. As Bufang broke through and became a heaven god, his cooking skills, together with his own understanding, had become more and more profound. Just watching him cook seemed to have a unique meaning of the great path. The crowd could not help but feel a little intoxicated as they watched. There were even some godly monarchs who gradually gained some insights as they watched. This was what a heaven god was capable of. His every move could make people think deeply. The corner of Mu Hongzhi's mouth twitched. He knew what Bufang was going to do. He was going to disgust the soul demons to the end. Swish, the black turtle constellation wok was opened. Immediately, a dense aura spread out, and there seemed to be a colorful glow swirling around it. The sound of the great path was chanting, and a divine light filled the air. Inside the black turtle constellation walk was a steamed jadeite claw. The skin, tendons, and bones were peeled off, making the paw look like jade-like glass. Bufang shook the wok and stirred it. The sticky sauce exuded a strong aroma. Rumble as Bufang cooked. The rift in front of them seemed to have changed. Rumble! A horrifying aura spread out. Behind the crack there seemed to be a huge eyeball emerging. It was filled with ferocity, and just by staring at the crowd, it made them shiver all over. There was no doubt that the existence behind the rift was a terrible existence no weaker than a modern-day heaven god. "You're courting death," a voice rang out from behind the rift. It was very faint, but it was like a thunderclap in the crowd's ears. The Xiai Divine Emperor and the others turned pale. Bufang's face remained the same as he watched indifferently. He shook his hand. Then, he poured the sauce in the Qilin transmigration ladle into the paw. Sizzle, clouds rose and bloomed like a colorful glow. The roars of the existence behind the rift grew louder and louder. All the soul demon eggs in the surroundings began to stir. This is the ingredient of the soul demon universe's great soul overlord, Bufang said. With a shake of his hand, the sauce streaked across the sky in an arc immediately. A vast dark cloud came rolling over, with thunder rumbling in it. It was the dish's lightning tribulation. Rumble! A thunderclap rumbled. However, Bufang raised his head and activated the god of cooking's eye. The bright light bursting out of his eyes dispersed the thunderclouds. The crowd was speechless. This tribulation was a little violent. "The honey soul dragon paw is done," Bufang said. As his words fell, it was as if his words were law, causing the entire space to tremble. Bufang flicked his finger and tapped the blue and white porcelain plate. The blue and white porcelain plate immediately flew out and instantly shot out. It floated in the middle of the crack and emitted endless rays of light. 5 gourmet arrays wheeled under the plate, suppressing the rift in an instant. The soul overlord behind the rift left in disgust. Suppressing the rift with a dish made by a soul overlord of the soul demon universe. "You're trying to disgust every soul demon who wants to reach the chaotic universe through the rift," Mu Hongzhi grinned. He liked this kind of simple and crude behavior. Soul demons hated gourmet food, and the meat of a soul overlord was the best ingredient in the world. Bufang's idea was really to his liking. It was a pity that he could not taste such a delicious dish. The glaze-like dragon paw glistened with the luster of the sauce as it hovered there, emanating a rich aroma that intoxicated everyone. Boom! 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 The soul demon eggs that were clinging to the meteorites exploded one after another. Then, one soul demon after another flew out of the meteorites, roaring and swooping toward the crowd. Bufang glanced at them. Then, he snapped his fingers. Click! A crisp sound rang out. The crowd was shocked. Then, they found that as the soul demons approached them, they gradually disappeared. Rumble! A wave of energy spread from the dish in the rift. Immediately, the darkness that had enveloped the meteorites was swept away. On each meteorite, there seemed to be a small tree swaying and rising. The meteorite forest, which had gone from dead silence to full of the aura of life, had turned into a land of enlightenment. Everyone marveled and was once again shocked by the means of a heaven god. Well, the threat of the soul demons has been lifted. Unless the soul god intervenes, even a great soul overlord will not break this rift. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Then, he waved his hand. Using the great void teleportation, he brought the crowd away. This place, on the other hand, seemed to have become a blooming flower in the boundless starry sky. It swayed quietly. When they returned to Nirvana, the Xiai Divine Emperor and the others had returned. However, after they returned, they sent the most talented geniuses of the Divine Dynasty to Nirvana. This planet was the place where a heaven god had reached the Great Path, and these geniuses could improve their talent and cultivation base here. For a moment, Nirvana was bustling with activity. Bufang stayed on Nirvana for a long time. He was settling down. Year after year passed. A city was built on Nirvana Star and a country was established. The population gradually increased, and all kinds of geniuses rose like mushrooms after a spring rain. Mu Hongzhi really moved the Heaven Chief realm here, while he took Summer to various parts of the chaotic universe to enjoy himself. Hades Tenzang went to Nirvana and became the city lord. This was the place where Bufang reached the Great Path. He was waiting for Bufang here. If Bufang returned with Hades' era, he would be able to find him soon. Bufang also stayed on Nirvana. However, few people knew where he was. He opened a small restaurant in a city on the Nirvana planet. This was an extremely simple and unadorned restaurant. He was consolidating his cultivation base while running his business. Although the restaurant's revenue could no longer improve his cultivation base, he enjoyed it. After all, he was still a chef. Early in the morning, the sky had just brightened. Bufang pushed open the door of the wooden hut. He rolled up his sleeves, carried a wooden barrel, and walked to the well in front of the hut. He threw the barrel down. Splash! The barrel fell into the well. With a splash, it sank into the well. Bufang slowly pulled it up, the half-filled barrel swaying in the wind. Then, he stepped into the hut with the barrel in hand, ready to start the day's cooking. He poured the water into the jar. Suddenly, Bufang paused, raised his eyebrows, and unleashed his mental force. In an instant, it enveloped heaven and earth. In a flash, it was as if he had crossed the universe. The next moment, Bufang found the voice calling him. However, the person who called him slightly surprised him. Hades' era? Chapter 1681. Hades' era? Bufang blinked. He was sure he didn't hear it wrong. That voice was indeed Hades' era's voice. However, it sounded distant and indistinct. Bufang blinked. He didn't expect that Hades' era would call him. He was going to look for him in a few days. He didn't expect that Hades' era would call him, which saved him a lot of trouble. After wiping the porcelain bowl in his hand, Bufang packed his things. Xiao Bai, let's go out for a ride. The corners of Bufang's mouth rose as he said indifferently. Then, he clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the restaurant. Xiao Bai's eyes flashed as he followed Bufang. When they walked out of the wooden restaurant, Xiao Bai closed the door behind him. After Bufang broke through to the heavenly god realm, Xiao Bai also changed. However, Bufang didn't notice these changes for the time being. However, Bufang could feel one thing. Xiao Bai's aura had become much more independent. It wasn't like before, when he was restrained by the system. Today, Xiao Bai was like an independent life form. Compared to the dull Xiao Bai before, he was more intelligent. To Xiao Bai, this should be a good change. Xiao Bai's appearance didn't change much. He was still fat as he walked behind Bufang. Little Hu and Xiaopi were lying on Bufang's shoulders. Xiaopi was sleeping soundly, as if he was wrapped in a cocoon. As for Little Hu, he had grown fatter. Apparently, he had been eating well recently. Boom! Bufang brought Xiao Bai out of Nirvana, walking slowly in the starry sky. However, although it was slow, with every step he took, the stars behind him flowed away. Hades' era's voice had already disappeared from Bufang's mind. However, the position of the shout had already been locked by Bufang, so Bufang only needed to look for it according to the position. Hades' era had disappeared ever since Bufang had returned. Bufang had no idea where he had gone. But now, it seemed that Hades' era had gone out to have fun. After all, the universe was so big. It was normal for him to want to go out and take a look. This direction, Bufang was speeding along with Xiao Bai when he suddenly fell silent. Because he felt that this direction seemed to have some sort of knack. The Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. Bufang descended with Xiao Bai and hovered over the Immortal Spirit Divine Dynasty. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang's vermilion robe flapped noisily. As soon as they landed, several figures flew over from the direction of the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Xiao Yinyu looked at Bufang in surprise. She didn't expect that Bufang would come to the immortal spirit divine dynasty. As the empress of the immortal spirit divine dynasty, she had too many things to do, so she didn't have much time to greet Bufang. Bufang also had a complicated expression on his face toward Xiao Yinyu, his old friend. Xiao Yinyu invited Bufang into the divine temple, and they walked while talking. Imo followed respectfully behind Xiao Yinyu, not daring to breathe loudly. She looked at Bufang, who was walking in front of her, with a complicated expression on her face. The chef she didn't think highly of had grown to a level where she didn't dare to look at him. Following behind Bufang, Xiao Bai glanced at Imo with its mechanical eyes flashing. Imo felt a chill run down her spine when the puppet glanced at her. Sure enough, everything around a heaven god was extraordinary. Xiao Yinyu had wanted to invite Bufang to a banquet, but Bufang refused. Bufang chatted with Xiao Yinyu. They talked about the past and the things that happened in the Light Wind Empire. Occasionally, when the conversation came to something interesting, Xiao Yinyu would cover her mouth and smile. Her every frown and smile was indeed very beautiful. Of course, they also talked about many acquaintances in the Light Wind Empire. Unfortunately, for them, who had reached this level today, many people had already gone with the wind, just like the past. Bufang chatted with Xiao Yinyu for a while. Then, he stood up. He told Xiao Yinyu the purpose of his trip. Oh? Owner Bu wants to go to the ancient heaven god's relic? Xiao Yinyu was taken aback. She didn't expect that Bufang would make such a request. Every divine dynasty had an ancient heaven god's relic, and so did the immortal spirit divine dynasty. However, for Bufang at his current level, it was meaningless for him to go there. Bufang just twitched the corner of his mouth, and said that he had sensed an old friend's cry for help in there. Xiao Yinyu didn't take it lightly and ordered Imo to make the arrangements. However, Bufang just waved his hand, took Whitey, and disappeared from where he was. For the current Bufang, Xiao Bai could teleport with just a thought. Xiao Yinyu's face stiffened. Her red lips parted slightly, and she exhaled. Xiao Yinyu's expression stiffened. Her red lips parted and she let out a breath. Xiao Bai and Bufang were indeed not at the same level now. Imo, pass the order that I'm going into seclusion, Xiao Yinyu said after a long silence. Xiao Yinyu was silent for a long time. There seemed to be determination in her tone. She had comprehended 4 supreme laws of the universe and was extremely talented. She was the only one who could keep up with Bufang's pace. She would also work hard to catch up. In the relic of an ancient heaven god in the immortal spirit divine dynasty, Bufang had been to the relic of an ancient heaven god in the Xiaoyi divine dynasty. At that time, it had become a playground for soul demons. But now, the calamity of the soul demons was over. Bufang walked in the relic, which was somewhat strange. The sky was blood-red. The ground was black. The style was somewhat bizarre. Xiao Bai followed behind Bufang. His feet seemed to sink deep into the soil. It was a strange feeling. Xiao Bai didn't care. Every time he lifted his foot, he seemed to pull up dirt. Bufang took one step at a time, neither too fast nor too slow. This was where Hades' Era's cry for help came from. Bufang followed the footsteps and searched for the source of the sound. The source of the sound came from the depths of the relic. Bufang and Whitey walked over. There were very few people in this ancient heaven god's relic. What they saw was a ground full of bones. These were the bones of god kings. They crossed the mountains, crossed the blood-red lake, and stepped on the swamp. Finally Bufang found Hades' Era on a hillside in the distance. Looking at Hades' Era's familiar figure, Bufang froze for a moment. He found that he couldn't recognize Hades' Era anymore. The playful Hades' Era had lost his innocence and romance. At this moment, he was kneeling on the ground, his face covered with unkempt hair. His arms were sunken as if they were weighed down by 1,000 kilograms, so heavy that he could not lift them. In Hades' era, Bufang felt a strong sorrow and heartache. This emotion, how could it appear in this prodigal son? Thinking of Hades' era, who laughed and called him young man, Bufang frowned. Tap, tap, tap. Bufang didn't fly but walked along the hillside step by step. Near the hillside there was a plain. Along the hillside there were footprints. The footprints were stained with blood. From the blood, Bufang sensed a sense of despair and sorrow. It seemed quite tragic. Whitey stomped on the ground, and with a boom, the ground caved in. The footprint immediately disappeared. Xiao Bai's body stiffened, like a child who had done something bad. He scratched his round head and his mechanical eyes flickered. Bufang's mouth twitched as if he was chuckling. Stay here. I'll go up and take a look, Bufang said. After that, he walked toward the figure kneeling on the hillside with his hands behind his back. Xiao Bai patted his chest with his fan-like palm and sat on the ground. He looked up at the sky. Bufang walked toward Hades' era with his hands behind his back. He flipped his hand. A spicy strip entwined with spiritual energy suddenly appeared. Hades' era knelt on the ground. He looked quite miserable. Bufang handed him the spicy strip. Nether King Ha raised his head, looking at Bufang with an incomparably aged face. His eyes were bloodshot and bloodshot. You're here, Hades' era said. He opened his mouth. His voice stunned Bufang. The vicissitudes of life and the bone-chilling coldness made Bufang frown. Was this still Hades' era? What on earth had he gone through to become like this? Hades' era glanced at the spicy strip in Bufang's hand. He hesitated for a while but didn't take it. It was mainly because he couldn't lift his hand. Bufang took out an oyster pancake and fed it to Hades' era. Gulp. After eating the oyster pancake, Hades' era coughed out a mouthful of blood. The terrifying power of the law was rampaging around the wound. Your wound. Bufang's eyes narrowed. He raised his hand and placed it on Hades' era's arms that he couldn't lift. Boom. Bufang seemed to feel a pair of eyes that seemed to have opened from the ancient times and was staring at him. Heavenly God's power? Bufang frowned. The divine power in him surged and swept out with rumbling sounds. The heavenly God's power was like a chain that wrapped around Hades' era's body, constantly destroying Hades' era's body. At this moment, the life force in Era's body was almost depleted. One should know that Hades' era had comprehended the law of life. Although the heavenly God's power was strong, it still shattered under the impact of Bufang's divine power. Hades' era's arms were restored, but the vicissitudes of his body didn't fade. It was a spiritual wound that Bufang didn't have the ability to heal. Bufang sat next to Hades' era. After eating the oyster pancake, Hades' era's condition was much better. At least, he didn't look so wretched. He handed a spicy strip to Hades' era. Bufang took a spicy strip and put it in the corner of his mouth. What happened? Tell me. It's rare to see you in such despair. Nether King Ha also held the spicy strip in his mouth, sucking it deeply. It was still a familiar taste that moved him. I've resurrected your father for you. I'll go see him when I have time, said Bufang. Hades' era's body shivered. After a while, he said, Thank you. His words of thanks were somehow heavy and grateful. Bufang raised his eyebrows in surprise. What happened to you? Why is there a heaven god's power in your body tormenting you? Asked Bufang. Hades' era held the spicy strip with 2 fingers. He took a deep breath, and he looked much more vicissitude. What is love in the world? It's the thing that makes people live and die together. Hades' era sighed. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. He glanced at Hades' era. Speak human language. Hades' era rolled his eyes at Bufang. You blockhead, what do you know? Ha ha. Bufang's mouth twitched with a fake smile. Hades' era didn't pay attention to Bufang's sneer. He seemed to be lost in his memories. His face revealed a gentle and happy smile. That smile made Bufang's hair stand on end. Bufang could guess that this guy had done something terrible. Do you want to listen to my story? Hades Era smiled. He sucked the spicy strip in his mouth and looked at Bufang. Bufang's face was expressionless. His hand shook. A jar of divine wine appeared. He poured himself a cup, took a sip, and looked at Era. You have a story, and I have wine. It's just right. Tell me. Hades Era looked at Bufang and smiled happily. It was good to have someone to listen to his story. After you and Lord Go left, I started to travel the universe. Then I met a girl. At the foot of the hill, Xiao Bai was also listening attentively. Bufang took a sip of wine. It seemed to be a beautiful love story. I'll omit 1,000 words about you and me, Bufang. Era exhaled and his eyes became sad. Finally, she told me that she was the daughter of God, and she came out to travel the world, and then? Bufang's spirit was instantly lifted. Hades Era looked at Bufang sadly. What is love in the world? It makes people want to live and die together. Bufang's mouth twitched. Speak human language. Hades Era pursed his lips. Then, I slept with her. Bufang. God appeared and took her away. He wanted to take my people away. I tried to stop him, but I was beaten and seriously injured without any resistance. Hades Era exhaled. Bufang's mouth twitched. This story was really exciting. You dared to sleep with God's daughter. No wonder you're Hades Tenzang's son. You're lucky you didn't die, Bufang said. No. That God slapped me from the chaos, and it was a fatal blow. I don't know why I didn't die. Hades Era's eyes were deep and full of vicissitudes. Maybe it's because I'm handsome. Bufang rolled his eyes. Who is that heaven god? There are only a few heaven gods in this world who can do that, Bufang asked. Nether King Ha exhaled, his eyes bursting with an unyielding look. I know. He calls himself Heaven God Transmigration. Chapter 1682. Hades Era was a little sad and hesitant. His eyes were full of vicissitudes, and his beard was unkempt. It was as if he had aged 10,000 years in an instant. He was like a lover who had begged before the Buddha, only to suffer the most tragic separation. His eyes seemed to be filled with stories. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Heaven God Transmigration. No wonder I felt a little familiar when I helped Era clean up the Heaven God's power in his body. It's Heaven God Transmigration. At the thought of that, Bufang could not help but want to shout. Good job, Era. You're the best. Even Bufang did not expect that Era would sleep with Heaven God Transmigration's daughter. It was a feat that ordinary people could not achieve. Even a heavenly god would be angered to death. The daughter of a heaven god had the blood of a heaven god in her veins. Her strength alone was far beyond Era's, not to mention her talent. For Ha to be able to sleep with such a proud woman, he had to admit that it was also a kind of ability. Most importantly, the daughter of a heaven god had fallen in love with him. Your story is really exciting. Bufang exhaled. After watching Era finish the spicy strip in his mouth, he took out another and handed it to Era. After Bufang's modification, the spicy strip was no longer just a spicy strip. After eating it, Era felt as if his strength was boiling. Not only had his injuries healed, but his fighting strength seemed to have improved a lot. However, Era's vitality was indeed strong. Even if an ordinary person comprehended the law of life, he would have been killed by Heaven God Transmigration's slap. However, Era had survived by relying on his vitality. Bufang was a little curious about the strangeness of it. She and I are truly in love. When Hades Era saw that Bufang didn't seem to take it seriously, he immediately became anxious. That day, when I saw her smiling amidst the flowers, I was completely captivated by her. Hand in hand, we crossed the great rivers, crossed the great rivers, barged into the forbidden lands, and killed the evil spirits. We lived and died together, and we enjoyed wealth and glory together. Hades' Era's eyes were a little blurred. At that time, she was disguised as a man. Bu Fang's eyebrows twitched as he thought about it. All right, you don't have to say any more. I understand. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. He stuffed another oyster pancake into Hades' Era's mouth and pulled Era up from his kneeling position. Rumble. The whole hillside seemed to tremble, and Heaven God Transmigration's aura permeated the surroundings as if it was about to explode. However, as Bu Fang waved his hand, those auras disappeared. Era's broken legs were restored by the wriggling life force. Obviously, the Heaven God's palm had hurt him badly. Bu Fang, young man. I, Era, have never begged you, but this time, I'm begging you. I want to go find her. Hades' Era said gloomily. Bu Fang looked at him expressionlessly. You've begged me for many things, haven't you? You've begged me for spicy strips more than 99 times. Hades' Era was speechless. But this time, I promise you, I also want to go find Heaven God Transmigration and settle the score. Bu Fang said lightly. Hades' Era was overjoyed. Sure enough, Bu Fang, young man, is the best. A gentle smile appeared on Hades' Era's handsome face as he hugged Bu Fang's thigh. Get lost. Bu Fang shuddered. This was the relic of an ancient heaven god in the immortal spirit divine dynasty. Bu Fang was not in a hurry to find Heaven God Transmigration, because Bu Fang had always known that the Heaven God was not in an ordinary place in the chaotic universe. He needed to think about it carefully before he went to find Heaven God Transmigration. A few days later, after eating a few spicy strips, Hades' Era had fully recovered. However, he did not change his unshaven appearance. According to him, it was a warning to him. He would not shave his beard until he found the person he loved. When she was taken away, Heaven God Transmigration seemed to strike from a boundless space. It was a turbid yellow spot, exuding an extremely terrifying aura. Nether King Ha recalled the scene at that time, even though it tore his heart apart like a knife. At that time, he had watched with wide eyes as his palms were separated from hers. His tightly clenched hands were forcibly torn apart, and his blood rushed to his fingertips. Sorrow lingered in his heart, making him despair and heaven and earth weep. A turbid yellow space, Bu Fang fell silent as he listened to Era's description. Now that he had become a heaven god, he could feel a tremendous suction from time to time when he closed his eyes, which came from the turbid yellow vortex. He did not know where the vortex came from, but he could feel that it was a mass of chaos. Perhaps it was the chaos of the chaotic universe. At the same time, he gradually found out where Heaven God Transmigration was. On this day, the ancient Heaven God's relic was suffused with a blood-red hue. Bu Fang brought Hades' Era to the hillside again. Clad in his vermilion robe, Bu Fang seemed to have become the only color in this space. The sky was gloomy and colorless, with a hint of haze and a heaviness that made it difficult to breathe. Bu Fang stood on the hillside with his hands clasped behind his back. Hades' Era stood in the distance. Heaven God Transmigration had taken away Hades' Era's woman from here. Now, Bu Fang would use this as a breakthrough point. Stand back a little. Bu Fang glanced at Hades' Era and said. Era nodded. He felt that Bu Fang's current state was somewhat different. Bu Fang took a deep breath. Then, he no longer suppressed his aura. He closed his eyes. The aura that belonged to a heaven god began to spread. Rumbled in an instant, a huge vortex appeared in the sky, tearing the sky apart. A terrible rumbling sound kept ringing in the sky. The wind blew. The black sand and stones on the ground were tossed and turned by the wind. Suddenly, thunder rumbled in the sky. It sounded like a thunderclap from the ninth heaven, deafening and affecting the depths of one's soul. Hades' Era looked up in shock. In the sky, a turbid yellow vortex emerged. The whirlpool continued to spin, causing Erha's heart to rise and fall. That's... Hades' era was extremely excited. The scene was exactly the same as the one that Heaven God Transmigration had appeared in the past. How could Bufang do it? What was Bufang's cultivation base now? Beneath the yellow vortex, Bufang stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His expression was calm as he stared at the turbid yellow vortex in the sky. The powerful suction coming from the vortex made Bufang want to fly toward it. It was a little like the legendary ascension. No wonder there were no heaven gods in the chaotic universe. It turned out that they had all ascended. Bufang, young man, Hades' era was so shocked that he could not close his mouth. Bufang glanced at Hades' era and twitched the corner of his mouth slightly. Heaven God, I'm also a heaven god. As his voice rang out, Bufang activated the god of cooking's eye. Buzz, the whole chaotic universe seemed to tremble at this moment. Meanwhile, in the immortal spirit divine dynasty, Xiao Yinyu, who was cultivating in seclusion, opened her eyes with a complicated look. In the Xiai divine dynasty, the Xiai divine emperor also took a deep breath. In a certain corner of the starry sky, Mu Hongzi, who was fishing with summer in the starry sky, smiled faintly. What's coming will eventually come. Rumble! The turbid yellow vortex spun. The hole in the middle grew larger and larger. Finally, it twisted completely, revealing the scene behind the turbid yellow vortex. It seemed to be a world that was getting wider and wider. A huge suction force erupted, and countless gravel was crushed into dust by this suction force. Bufang arched his brows. This kind of power was really not something that ordinary people could enter. Even a god king would be crushed by its fleshly body. Bufang took a step and soared into the sky. Under the guidance of the light beam, it walked towards the boundless void. At this moment there seemed to be divine music, divine light, dazzling neon lights, and dazzling auroras. They set off Bufang like an immortal who stood aloof from the world. He did look a little like a flying immortal. Era, come here quickly, Bufang said. With a shake of his hand, the black turtle constellation wok flew out. The wok spun and grew larger. The next moment, it spun and turned into a huge black wok. Hades' era paused for a moment before he was sucked into the black wok and fell inside. Carrying him, the black turtle constellation wok flew into the void. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang's hair fluttered in the wind. The velvet rope that tied his hair suddenly broke, and his hair drifted down from the chaos toward the mortal world below. Hades' era's jaw dropped. Everything in front of him shocked him. However, he was a little excited. With trembling hands, he took out a spicy strip and put it in his mouth. Love, here I come. Hades' era cried out in his heart, and his eyes grew firmer. Rumble! It was as if heaven and earth were shaking. At this moment, the whole chaotic universe was filled with strange phenomena. The Nirvana star, which was hundreds of millions of miles away, suddenly shook. Then, boundless spirit energy gushed out from the core of the Nirvana star. The whole planet was bathed in this vast spiritual energy. All the newborns born on Nirvana seemed to be blessed. Their bodies glowed brightly as if they were baptized by the divine light. In the capital of the Xiai divine dynasty, the divine emperor walked out of the palace. With his hands clasped behind his back, he looked up at the starry sky and sighed with emotion. Owner Bu has also left. It seems that one has to go to the chaos after becoming a heaven god. The mystery of the disappearance of the current heaven gods and the disappearance of the ancient heaven gods must be related to the chaos. I hope Owner Bu can solve this mystery. Rumble! It did not feel good to ascend to the immortal world. That turbid yellow energy seemed to be able to peel off a layer of skin. Hades' era lay on the black turtle constellation wok, trembling. The tremendous pressure made him unable to move. Above him, lightning flashed, wind blew, fire burned, and rain fell. It was as if he had experienced the end of the world. Finally, the the black turtle constellation walk no longer trembled, and everything calmed down. Is it over? Hades' Era's heart skipped a beat. Come out. Bufang's faint voice rang out. When Hades' Era heard that, he cautiously poked his head out of the walk. What he saw was a hazy world. The sky was murky yellow, and the spiritual energy between heaven and earth was so thick that it seemed to turn into liquid. When he took a deep breath, the liquid went into his nostrils, making him feel so uncomfortable that he wanted to sneeze. Where am I? Hades' Era froze. This is the chaos. Bufang's weak voice rang out from beside him. Hades' Era was startled. He turned his head and saw Bufang standing in the distance with his hands clasped behind his back. His face was pale and unsightly. High up in the sky, a huge turbid yellow sphere was suspended, emitting boundless energy at all times. Is that ball the so-called chaos? This is the deepest part of the chaotic universe, the chaotic space. It's also the secret of the heaven gods not appearing. Of course. Your woman is here too. Bufang said. He put away the god of cooking set. Bufang took a deep breath. His body glowed as he absorbed energy all the time. From the chaotic universe to the chaotic space, he had almost used up all his heaven god energy. Although his body was automatically absorbing energy, it would take some time for him to recover. So what should we do now? It was Era's first time in this place, so he couldn't make up his mind. Bufang glanced at Era, then at the distance. His mouth twitching, he said, "Our arrival has attracted a lot of attention. Someone is coming to pick us up." Chapter 1683. Someone is here to pick us up? Hades' Era froze. Bufang nodded and said no more. He raised his head and looked into the distance. A whistling sound rang out. The sound of something piercing through the air could be heard coming from all directions. The ringing of silver bells rang out. Then, under Nether King Erha's surprised gaze, figures descended one by one. These figures were of different shapes and sizes, and each seemed to be high and mighty. Their auras were so powerful that just a wisp of them made Hades' Era's heart skip a beat. Among them were many god kings and god emperors. However, Hades' Era soon became excited. He found that the aura of these people was the same as that of heaven god Transmigration's daughter, whom he had slept with. What did that mean? It meant that they were in the right place. True love. I'm here. Nether King Erha clenched his fists, and his eyes seemed to twinkle. True love? Bufang glanced at Era and shook his head. These people are not here to talk about love with me. If Bufang was right, heaven god Transmigration should have sensed him the moment he stepped into the chaos space. There was no way that fellow could not have sensed him. Bufang was certain that he had been observing him all this time. Moreover, heaven god Transmigration had wanted to kill him since a long time ago. Why did he want to kill him? Bufang did not know the answer, but he did not care. Since heaven god Transmigration wanted to kill him, Bufang would not be polite. He would certainly fight back. Bufang was also very curious about this chaos space. When he broke through and became a heaven god, he needed a causality throne, and 4 heaven gods gave some to him. Those heaven gods were undoubtedly kind to him. Heaven god Transmigration was the only one who did not share a causality position with him. He was the only one who did not share a causality position with him. Of course, the causality throne belonged to heaven god Transmigration. If he did not share it, Bufang would not force him. However, heaven god Transmigration had angered Bufang by trying to kill him twice. On Bufang's shoulders, Little Hu and Xiaopi both raised their heads. Their eyes darted around as they enjoyed the spiritual energy in the air. The celestial god was right. Someone really ascended to the primal chaos dimension. For millions of years, he's the first to ascend. We've almost forgotten what the people outside look like. The heavenly god has ordered us to capture this ascendant at all costs. If you capture him, the heavenly God will reward you handsomely." The experts who had come to surround them all roared in anger. In the next moment, it turned into a tidal wave, rushing toward Bufang and Hades' era. Hades' era felt a chill down his spine. There were so many god kings, and there were even quite a few god emperors among them. They had just descended. Were they going to die? Bufang, on the other hand, was very calm. Although his face was pale and he was in a poor state, he was a heaven god. Even if he stood still and let these people attack him, they would not be able to break his body. As for Hades' era, he could not guarantee that he would be fine. These god kings and god emperors had the aura of time on them, and they had lived for a very long time. They must have lived in the primal chaos dimension for countless years. Bufang, young man, what should we do now? Judging from their posture, they don't seem to be here to welcome us. Hades' era's face darkened. Was he going to be killed before he even set foot on the path of love? Don't worry. Relax. Bufang handed a spicy strip to Era, who held it in his mouth with trembling hands. Boom. Boom. However, the next moment, Hades' era almost spat out the spicy strip. The reason was that the ancient god kings and god emperors were crazily bombarding them with terrible energy and attacks. Even the void seemed to have been shattered. This scene was so shocking that one's heart was about to jump out of his chest. Bufang, on the other hand, was very calm. He continued to eat the spicy strip. Boom! Right at this moment, in another direction, a terrible rumbling sound rang out. The sound of something tearing through the air could be heard. Energy waves swept out and enveloped Bufang and Hades' era. When the energy waves came close to Bufang and Era, they exploded like dazzling fireworks. Hades' era was bewildered. Bufang took a bite of the spicy strip. The corners of his mouth twitched as he turned to look. Look, the person who will welcome us is here. In the distance, a figure flew over with a solemn face, landing beside Hades' era and Bufang. It was a woman. Her skin was bronze, and she had a valiant and vigorous posture. She glanced at Hades' era and ignored him. Her eyes fell on Bufang. "Are you Bufang?" the woman said. Her tone was neither servile nor overbearing. Bufang nodded. "I'm the heavenly god's protector. I'm here to welcome you on the heavenly god's order," the woman said. Bufang nodded again. This woman actually admired Bufang. Even after so many terrifying attacks, his expression did not change. He did have some character. "Hey beauty, are you here to welcome us?" Hades' era's eyes lit up when he saw the woman. "Shut up," the woman said indifferently as she glanced at Era. As the heavenly god's protector, she had a noble status. She was only here to welcome Bufang. As for the other man's life or death, the heavenly god did not say anything. It had nothing to do with her. "Rise." The woman looked into the distance and saw a group of people swarming toward them. Her expression was extremely solemn. She raised her hands. It was as if thousands of clouds were lifted up and shot toward the god kings and god emperors. Boom. "Let's go." The woman did not say much. After making her move, she brought Bufang and Era and flew into the distance. "This move won't last long. We have to hurry to the heavenly god temple. Only when we get there will these fellows not dare to act presumptuously," the woman said. Hades' era hurried forward. Bufang clasped his hands behind his back. He walked at a leisurely pace. With every step he took, he could keep up with the speed of the woman and Hades' era. The woman looked at Bufang in surprise. She was the heavenly god's protector, but she could not see through Bufang's cultivation base. The person whom the heavenly god had ordered to welcome was indeed not ordinary. This man even had the leisure to play with the pet on his shoulder. No one knew whether it was because he was skilled or because he was out of his mind. Rumble. In the distance, the clouds were torn apart. The god kings and god emperors narrowed their eyes. "It's that woman Yuntiani. Go after her," The group of people roared and sped toward the woman as if they had turned into beams of light. Yun Tianyi did not expect that the person whom the heavenly god had ordered to welcome would be chased by experts from Heaven God Transmigration's camp. What kind of grudge did they have against each other? She glanced at the man and felt that he was extraordinary. Suddenly Yun Tianyi's face turned pale. Rumble behind her, the terrible power of law swirled and turned into a terrible palm. The palm contained the ultimate power of destruction. Oh no! It's the ancient heaven god! Yun Tianyi's face turned ghastly pale. You go first. Yun Tianyi glanced at Bufang and Erha. Then, she stopped walking, sending sand and stones flying as she spun around. She took a deep breath. 6 energy vortexes emerged around her. Then, she threw them out and collided with the ancient heaven god's palm. However, her 6 energy vortexes could not withstand a single blow from the ancient heaven god. They collapsed instantly. With a slapping sound, Yun Tianyi took a few steps back. As she retreated, she flicked her fingers, and a strand of black dog fur flew out. The dog fur swelled in the wind, turned into a beam of black light, and collided with the ancient heaven god's palm. A deafening rumble rang out. The ancient heaven god's palm dissipated in an instant. Yun Tianyi's qi and blood fluctuated. After landing, she tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and dashed to Bufang's side. Then, she sped up and flew into the distance. Hades' eyes widened. He glanced at Yun Tianyi and felt a sense of familiarity. No, it was the dog fur that made him feel a sense of familiarity. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. The familiar dog fur. After teasing Xiaopi for a while, Bufang continued to walk leisurely. In the clouds, a silhouette appeared. Damn it! Even Heaven God Time wants this person. No. The person that Heaven God Transmigration wants must not fall into Heaven God Time's hands. The figure said coldly. Then, with a thought in his mind, he raised his hand. In an instant, the power of the law swept out like a tidal wave. The ground began to crumble. The ground under Yun Tianyi and the others' feet cracked, and cracks spread across the ground, looking extremely hideous. The appearance of a heaven god level expert was not good news for Yun Tianyi and the others. Bufang gave the ancient heaven god a surprised look. In the present age, it was very difficult to become a heaven god. Once a heaven god became a chaotic saint. In ancient times, it was relatively easy to become a heaven god in the chaotic universe. Bufang also speculated that the heaven gods of that time were almost at the level of saints of the Great Path. In short, the ancient heaven gods were probably at the level of saints of the Great Path. Rumble. The ground crumbled. Yun Tianyi and Hades' swayed. However, Bufang was as steady as Mount Tai. Gritting her teeth, Yun Tianyi threw out 2 strands of black dog fur in a row, which turned into black light and stabilized the crumbling ground. The 3 of them sped away again. Do you have any more fur from that mangy dog? Keep throwing. Hades' looked at Yun Tianyi, his eyes gleaming. Shut up. Who do you think you are? How dare you insult His Excellency like this? Yun Tianyi glared at Hades' when she heard that. Twitched the corner of his mouth guiltily. When I was rolling around in the mud with that mangy dog, I don't even know where you were. Erha muttered. When Yun Tianyi glared at him, he quickly corrected his attitude. His Excellency only gave me 3 strands of dog fur, and now they are all used up. If that heaven god continues to chase after us, it will be difficult for us to escape. Yun Tianyi sighed. Heaven God Transmigration's power controls the entire chaos space. It will be difficult for us to fight against him. Boom. In the distance, the ancient heaven god let out a wild roar. He shot forward in a flash and gradually approached them. A terrible aura filled the air. It was the aura of a heaven god. In addition to the heaven god, many god kings and god emperors were also approaching. It was a hopeless situation. A look of determination came into Yun Tianyi's eyes. She turned around, stood still, and gave a low growl. "Go now. I'll stop them," she cried out resolutely. "Keep running forward. Once you enter the territory of the Temple of Heaven God Time, you will be safe." Yuntiani gritted her teeth. In the next moment, she bit her finger, causing blood to spurt out. The blood pervaded the air as she suddenly drew a pattern on her arm. When the pattern was completed, Yuntiani's aura began to rise. Soon, she broke through to the level of a saint of the Great Path. Bufang stopped and looked at Yuntiani in surprise. The method Yuntiani was using now should be a way to stimulate the heaven god's bloodline in her, but it should be a great burden on her body. However, at this moment she was ready to die, and she would not hesitate to overdraft her bloodline. Hades' era could not help but be moved. Suddenly, he froze because he found that Bufang had disappeared from his side. He knew that Bufang was a heaven god, but the other side also had a heaven god. Bufang had just ascended, and his divine power had been consumed. How could he fight them? If he returned now, it would be a waste of this woman's effort. Yuntiani roared and gritted her teeth. Her eyes were burning with hatred. "You traitors! Come on! Let's die together!" The blood in her body was boiling. It was as if it was about to burn. Rumble, the law of time spread over her head. Suddenly, a fair and slender palm rested on her shoulder. Her boiling blood calmed down in an instant. Her aura, which had reached the heaven god level, slowly calmed down. Yuntiani paused. She turned her head and saw that it was Bufang. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched as he shook his head. He had just eaten a few spicy strips and regained some of his divine power. It was not enough to deal with heaven god transmigration, but it was enough to deal with this ancient heaven god. Suddenly Bufang frowned, then slowly relaxed his brows. He did not need to do anything now. Yuntiani's eyes lit up. She looked behind her. There, the silver power of the law was spreading. Amidst the thousands of rays of silver light, a black dog's paw slowly reached out. "How dare you touch the Lord Go's people? You're courting death!" A deafening voice rang out. The dog's paw approached Yuntiani and Bufang's heads in a flash. In the distance, the insufferably arrogant ancient heavenly god's heart instantly went cold, and he was instantly filled with terror. Chapter 1684. The silver light was bright and dazzling. A magnetic voice rang out, and in the next instant, a dog paw slashed through the air. It was a pitch-black dog paw. In the primal chaos space, countless people were shocked. Everyone understood what the appearance of this claw meant. The heavenly time god. The heavenly time god had made her move. The ancient heavenly god's hair stood on end. He was just a saint of the Great Path, and if he encountered a modern-day heaven god, he would definitely be defeated. The gap between their strength was obvious. However, he would not allow himself to be captured and wait for death. He let out a long roar, and the power of the law of destruction boiled. The law of destruction seemed to turn into a sweeping tornado that soared into the sky and collided with the dog's paw that was slapping down. A rumbling sound rang out. The law of destruction was forcibly suppressed. The arms of the ancient heaven god exploded, and his legs knelt in the air as he was struck to the ground. All the god kings and god emperors stopped. They didn't dare to take even half a step forward. They followed heaven god transmigration, but they were still terrified of heaven god time. After all, he was a modern-day heavenly god, a supreme existence of the primal chaos. How could they dare to offend him? Didn't they see how the ancient heaven god was beaten to the ground by a single claw? It's Lord Sky God. Yuntiani was very excited, and her eyes sparkled with surprise. She thought she was going to die. However, the heavenly time god's intervention had given her hope again. In the distance, the group of people did not dare to take another step forward. Wherever the silver light passed, all the god kings and god emperors retreated in fear. That ancient heavenly god's arms were smashed apart by that single claw strike. Even though they were slowly recovering, there was still a look of fear on his face. He knelt on the ground, his body covered in blood. You wouldn't dare to kill me. I am Heaven God Transmigration's protector. If you kill me, Heaven God Transmigration will destroy your temple of Heaven God Time. That ancient heavenly deity coughed out blood from his mouth. Even though he was alarmed, he still screamed out. He was betting that the heavenly time god wouldn't dare to kill him. Heaven God Transmigration was in charge of the chaos space now. The heavenly time god had returned, but she could only hole up in a corner. The silver light seemed to hesitate. This made the ancient heavenly god feel as if he had drunk honey. He knew he had made the right bet. The heavenly time god didn't dare to kill him. Therefore, he clamored even more fiercely. Yuntiani gritted her teeth, feeling hatred in her heart. However, she was helpless because what the ancient heavenly deity said was the truth. Bufang raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the silver light in the sky, the corners of his mouth twitched. He suddenly strode forward. Yuntiani was surprised. What are you doing? Come back. Yuntiani said anxiously. However, as soon as the words left her mouth, she was stunned. Heaven God Transmigration? Bufang's indifferent voice resounded throughout the entire place, causing everyone present to be stunned. The next moment, Bufang flicked his finger. I have a score to settle with him. It was as if a baiguang had shot out from his palm. As the white light shot out, it grew bigger and bigger in the void, and bigger in the end. It seemed to have turned into a white, round lump of iron. Boom! The iron lump suddenly descended vertically and smashed into the body of the ancient heaven god, who was kneeling on the ground, craning his neck and clamoring non-stop. Rumble! The ancient heaven god was flattened by the impact. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. He raised his huge palm and touched his head. The next moment, he twisted his buttocks and let out a wail. Bam! Bam! Xiao Bai hurriedly rose to his feet and stamped the body twice. What is that? Everyone present was stunned. Yuntiani looked at Bufang, dumbfounded, and then at the puppet that had trampled the ancient heaven god under its feet. Xiao Bai, beat him to death, Bufang said indifferently. Upon hearing that, Hades' eyes lit up. The silver light in the sky trembled and then faded away. You're courting death. The ancient heavenly god roared furiously, sending Whitey flying away. Even heaven god time doesn't dare to kill me. Who do you think you are? You're just a man who has just ascended from the mortal world. The ancient heaven god roared. His arms were slowly growing. However, Bufang shook his head indifferently. Sure enough, the next moment, Xiao Bai's huge palm reached out and grabbed the ancient heaven god's head. The ancient heaven god paused. Rumble! A huge fist suddenly hit him in the face. Furious, he tried to circulate the divine power in him, but to his horror, he found that he couldn't use it. What's going on? Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. Troublemaker! You will be stripped as an example to others. As soon as his voice rang out, the ancient heaven god felt a chill run down his spine. Then, slash! His armor was torn to pieces and fell to the ground. Just like that, he was dragged by the iron puppet, completely naked. In the distance, the god kings and the god emperors were all dumbfounded. Bufang, on the other hand, didn't care. Since the system had upgraded, Xiao Bai had naturally upgraded as well. Now, Xiao Bai had no trouble dealing with a saint of the Great Path. As long as Xiao Bai locked onto a saint of the Great Path, he would not be able to use his magic power and could only use his physical strength. A chaotic saint would not be subject to this restriction. However, this ancient heaven god was obviously not a chaotic saint. So, he could only be ravaged by Xiao Bai. After being hit by the Lord Go's palm, his body was already broken. Now, in Xiao Bai's hands, he could not resist at all. Under the silence of the god kings and god kings, The Ancient God by Xiao Bai threw out punch after punch. He was like a delicate flower in the wind, suffering from the torment of the extremely terrifying man. Everyone's heart turned cold. Yun Tianyi froze. She gave Bu Fong an incredulous look. Who is this man? Even a subordinate of his is so terrifying. When she thought of how she tried to resist with her life, she found it a little ridiculous. Xiao Bai's mechanical eyes flashed. His movements were neither fast nor slow, but they were very violent. Bang! The ancient heaven god's head exploded in an instant. A divine core flew out of his body, and Xiao Bai reached out his huge palm and grabbed it. The next moment, a black hole appeared in his abdomen, and the divine core was shoved into his belly. Xiao Bai's body trembled, and a blooming hua flower emerged on his white skin. As if burping, Xiao Bai scratched his head, then turned his eyes to the group of god kings and god emperors in the distance. Without saying a word, these people ran away like birds frightened by the twang of a bowstring. An ancient heaven god was killed just like that. Even his divine core was swallowed, and the results of his countless years of cultivation were gone. Of course, the ancient heaven god was not dead yet. His soul turned into a stream of light and was about to flee. Xiao Bai had no attachment to this soul. However, Whitey had spared him, but Bu Fong had no memory of sparing him. Did you have a good time chasing me? The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. His mind flickered. Rumble! Behind him, a terrible existence that seemed to have awakened from ancient times soared into the sky, emanating a terrible aura. The Qilin opened his eyes, opened his mouth, and unleashed a great suction force that sucked the ancient heaven god's divine soul into his mouth. The Qilin twitched his mouth in disgust. Compared with the soul of a soul overlord, this ancient heaven god's soul did not taste as good. He rolled his eyes at Bu Fong, then sank back into Bu Fong's spirit sea. This Qilin is a picky eater. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched and he shook his head. Yun Tianyi's eyes and mouth widened. Her mouth was so wide that a large steamed bun could be stuffed into it. What kind of existence did Heaven God Time want her to welcome? Yun Tianyi had always thought that this man might be a god king or god emperor, but now it seemed that he was a heaven god. What the? A heaven god? If he is not an ancient heaven god, is he a modern-day heaven god? But there is no such heaven god among the modern-day heaven gods. Having grown up in the chaos space, Yun Tianyi knew the modern-day heaven gods very well. Heaven god life, heaven god destruction, heaven god space, heaven god time, and heaven god transmigration, 5 modern-day heaven gods, the 5 supreme rulers of the chaos space. However, except for heaven god transmigration and heaven god time, who had just returned, the other heaven gods were nowhere to be found. He did not answer Yun Tianyi's questions. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bu Fong walked into the distance. A hua flower bloomed on Xiao Bai's buttocks as he sped toward Bu Fong. Heaven God Transmigration's forces had retreated. They had no choice but to retreat, or they would all have to stay. They could only go back and report to Heaven God Transmigration. When Xiao Bai passed by Yun Tianyi, he gave her a sideways glance with his mechanical eyes, which scared her so much that her blood and energy seemed to stagnate. Lead the way to the Temple of Heaven God Time. I can finally see my old friend. Bu Fong's faint voice woke Yun Tianyi up with a start. She glanced at the ancient heaven god's corpse in the distance, which had turned into a pile of mud. Yun Tianyi was shocked. It had been many years since an ancient heaven god had fallen in the chaos space. She had an intuition. With the appearance of this man, there would be a bloodbath in the chaos space again. Fortunately, this man was not an enemy. Is this the Temple of Heaven God Time? Bu Fong's voice was a little puzzled. Yun Tianyi took a deep breath and nodded solemnly. In front of him was a towering palace. The palace was tall and should have been dazzling with gold and jade. But the palace had collapsed, and rubble was scattered all over the ground. Looking down from above, They could see that the palace had been smashed by a palm. Hades' era smacked his lip. I thought the temple of heaven god time you mentioned was supposed to be full of disciples and experts. Why is it so quiet? Hades' era said. Now, only heaven god time, who has just returned, and me are left in the temple of heaven god time. Yun Tianyi said. Are you kidding me? Hades' era tilted his head. Bufang did not ask too many questions. He put his hands behind his back and stepped into the palace. Xiao Bai and Hades' era followed him. The palace was as dilapidated as ever. The collapsed walls and dilapidated ground showed an ancient and dilapidated appearance. The aura of vicissitudes and time permeated the palace. In front of the door there was a collapsed plaque. The plaque was broken in half and covered with dust. The words, Temple of Heaven God, were written on it. Bufang narrowed his eyes slightly. They stepped into the palace. The Temple of Heaven God was very quiet. The sound of footsteps echoed in the palace, bringing with it the noise of ancient times. All of a sudden, Bufang stopped. He put his hands behind his back and looked into the depths of the pitch-black palace in the distance. Over there, a black dog strutted its cat-like steps, slowly twisting its doggy, but as it wobbled out from within. It was a black dog with bright eyes, and its fur was extremely shiny. Bufang, boy, you're finally here. When Lord Go saw Bufang, he twitched his mouth and said. When Yun Tianyi saw Lord Go, she immediately knelt down in a feverish manner. Welcome, Heaven God time! Hades' era shouted happily. Mangy dog! Of course, he was glared at by Yun Tianyi. Bufang looked at Lord Go with a complicated look in his eyes. He could sense that Lord Go's aura was a little weak. Obviously, he was injured. Little Black, you've lost weight. Bufang looked at Lord Go, the corners of his mouth curled up, and he said lightly. Indeed, the Lord Dog in front of them wasn't as plump as before. The originally heavy fat seemed to have melted like snow. Although he looked a lot more magical, it made Bufang's heart ache. Without him, Lord Go would not be able to eat and sleep well. Lord Go rolled his eyes and rolled his eyes at Bufang. Cut the crap. Hurry up and give Lord Go a plate of sweet and sour dragon ribs. Let Lord Go see if your cooking skills have improved after becoming a heaven god. Just as Lord Go finished speaking, the expressions of the people in the palace changed dramatically. Lord Go frowned and a murderous look flashed in his eyes. Bufang raised an eyebrow. Yun Tianyi's eyes were filled with horror. Nether King Ha was burning with rage. Old bastard! You still dare to bring I here? Hades' era roared. Rumble, outside the dilapidated Heaven God Palace, a terrifying aura suddenly floated over, and the gray energy instantly covered the sky of primal chaos. The void seemed to be boiling. In the gray law of transmigration, a figure slowly sat cross-legged with a gray disk behind his head. His aura seemed to be able to overturn the chaos. Bufang narrowed his eyes. Heaven God. Transmigration. Chapter 1685. Heaven God Transmigration. He did not expect to meet him so soon. Not only did Bufang not expect it, but even Heaven God Transmigration himself might not have expected it. In the chaotic universe, he had repeatedly suppressed Bufang, and every time he attacked, he had done so with great killing intent. This made Bufang very angry. This time, Bufang had come to the chaotic universe to settle the grudge with Heaven God Transmigration. There was definitely a deep grudge between him and Heaven God Transmigration that had not been resolved yet. At least, Bufang knew very well that Heaven God Transmigration would not want to kill him for no reason. Next to Bufang, Hades' era's eyes were bloodshot. It's him. Yes, it's him. He could not forget Heaven God Transmigration's aura. He and the woman he loved were torn apart by Heaven God Transmigration. Lovers were forcibly separated. How could this old man be so vicious? Yun Tianyi's body was trembling, and cold sweat seemed to be dripping down her bronzed skin. She was so scared that she was sweating profusely. That was Heaven God Transmigration, the strongest controller of the chaotic universe. Even Heaven God Time was at a disadvantage when fighting him. In the face of such an existence, she naturally felt inferior. In the chaotic universe outside the temple of Heaven God, a figure was sitting cross-legged, surrounded by a vast gray energy. It was the power of transmigration, the law of transmigration that made people tremble. There seemed to be a huge transmigration spinning above his head. There seemed to be countless souls wailing in the transmigration, constantly providing Heaven God Transmigration with a steady stream of power. Bufang was no stranger to transmigration. He had seen it when he forcibly pulled Hades' Tenzang out of it. But today Bufang saw the real controller of transmigration. Buzz, the figure sitting cross-legged in the void, slowly opened his eyes, and an ancient aura seemed to rise from them. Everyone's heart skipped a beat. Old thief! Where did you hide, eyes woman? Hades' Era's eyes were bloodshot. It was rare for him to meet true love, but it was broken up by this old man. For the sake of love, he was willing to give up everything. Even if he had to shed all pretenses of cordiality with this old man, he wouldn't hesitate. It seemed that Hades' Era's shout had attracted Heaven God Transmigration's attention. His eyes were so deep that they seemed to be able to suck in a person's soul. This was a modern-day Empyrean god, equivalent to a chaotic saint. His strength was incomparably terrifying. Swaran was also a chaotic saint, but his aura was weaker than Heaven God Transmigration's. You little thief, you actually didn't die. Heaven God Transmigration opened his eyes and said lightly. He was a little surprised. Even an ordinary ancient heavenly god would be reduced to a pile of meat paste by that palm of his. And yet, this fellow before him was still alive and kicking, and was even making a ruckus in front of him. Do you know the power of love? You don't understand. Love doesn't let me die. You old thief, you don't know what love is. Hades' Era shouted at the top of his lungs. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Yun Tianyi, who was trembling, could not help but roll her eyes. This guy is really not afraid of death. Doesn't he know that he's facing the strongest man in the chaotic world? How dare he make such a ruckus? If Heaven God Transmigration wanted to kill him, he could crush Hades' Era with his little finger. That's enough. Lord Go could not stand Hades' Era. Era froze for a moment, then he took a few steps back with a smile on his face. Heaven God Transmigration was too lazy to pay attention to him. The purpose of his visit was to meet Bufang. You're finally here, Heaven God Transmigration said coldly as he looked at Bufang. He rose to his feet in midair. The disk behind his head kept spinning, emitting a dazzling luster. A terrifying gust of wind blew down, causing Bufang's vermilion robe to flutter violently. It's time to settle our scores, Bufang said expressionlessly. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes. It's rare for someone from the lower realms to become a heavenly deity and ascend to the primal chaos. What a pity I didn't kill you when you were at your weakest. When you ascend to the primal chaos, you will also be at your weakest. As expected, I can't count on a bunch of trash. Heaven God Transmigration said lightly. He walked down step by step. Boom. As his foot fell, outside the temple of heavenly time, countless rays of light instantly flickered. They were so bright and dazzling that they managed to block Heaven God Transmigration's step. This is the temple of heavenly time. You won't be able to enter, the Lord Go said indifferently. His dog eyes were fixed on Heaven God Transmigration. The latter smiled faintly, as if he was not surprised. How much longer can you hide like a turtle, Heaven God Samsara said. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the Lord Go seemed to be irritated. His fur seemed to be on the verge of exploding. Time seemed to stand still at this moment. Then, everyone's vision blurred. They found that the Lord Go had appeared outside the temple of heavenly time. Then, he thrust his paw toward Heaven God Transmigration's face. Bam! A collision broke out in an instant. The Lord Go and Heaven God Transmigration collided head-on in the sky, and a terrible aura of the law spread in an instant. Rumble, the primal chaos hanging high in the sky seemed to tremble under the impact of the collision, and it seemed to be dispersing a little. Bufang boy, cook sweet and sour ribs for the Lord Go. When the Lord Go is done with this old fellow, he will come back and have a taste of the sweet and sour ribs. The Lord Go's voice rang out in the sky. Then, he and Heaven God Transmigration rushed higher and higher into the clouds. Gradually, they disappeared from sight. The two seemed to have rushed into the primal chaos and were fighting there. In the temple of heavenly time, Yun Tianyi was a little stunned. She did not understand what the Lord Go meant. Bufang, on the other hand, twitched the corner of his mouth slightly, and his hand shook. Immediately, the dragon bone kitchen knife and the black turtle constellation wok appeared, and he began to cook. Although the divine power in his body was not fully recovered, it was enough for him to cook. Yun Tianyi was a little stunned. She had been in the primal chaos for so many years, and it had been a long time since she had seen a chef. He did not expect that a heaven god was actually a chef. Bufang's movements were as smooth as flowing water. His cooking skills were now at the level of a quasi-god of cooking. Every step of the cooking process seemed to be filled with the power of the law and the aura of the great path. At least, it looked pleasing to the eye. Yun Tianyi sneered as she watched. Bufang took out Pride Great Soul Overlord's meat. Pride Great Soul Overlord was also a dragon, so it was easy for him to cook. Piece by piece, the ingredients were put into the wok, and a strong aroma filled the air. In the sky, the battle between the Lord Go and Heaven God Transmigration was still going on. Meanwhile, the cooking in the Temple of Heaven God Time did not stop. The temple is protected by an array that no one can break. We are safe here as long as we don't go out, Yun Tianyi said. No one can break it? No one can break it? Then why is the Temple of Heaven God Time so dilapidated? Hades Era asked, glancing at Bufang, then at Yun Tianyi. The Temple of Heaven God Time did not look indestructible with only broken walls left. You don't understand. This happened during the Great Change in the Chaos Space. That battle almost destroyed the entire Chaos Space. A palm came from outside the Chaos Space, the Temple of Heaven God Time, Temple of Heaven God Life, Temple of Heaven God Destruction, and Temple of Heaven God Space were all smashed by a palm. Yun Tianyi said with nostalgia. From then on, very few people from outside the Chaos Space could ascend, and the situation in the Chaos Space changed drastically. Heaven God Transmigration's forces began to attack the forces of the other heaven gods, annexing them and killing them. Many ancient clans were destroyed in that battle. There was sadness in Yun Tianyi's eyes. The Yun family was an ancient clan under Heaven God Time. Unfortunately, she was the only one left of the once magnificent Yun family. Hades Era paused. The Temple of Heaven God Transmigration was not destroyed. Then there must be something wrong with Heaven God Transmigration. We all know there is something wrong, but after the palm came from outside the Chaos Space, all the other heaven gods disappeared except for Heaven God Transmigration. No one in the Chaos Space can stop Heaven God Transmigration's rule. Yun Tianyi exhaled. She looked up at the rumbling Chaos Space and sighed with emotion. After countless years, Heaven God Time had returned. Perhaps it was time for the Chaos Space to shine again. On the other side, Bufang's cooking was coming to an end. As he finished cooking, the aroma seemed to turn into mist and spread. The fragrance seemed to turn into a dense mist that spread out. With a flip of the Qilin Transmigration ladle, the thick sauce was poured onto it. The whole dish seemed to come to life. Yun Tianyi was astonished by the lifelike dish. Is this the sweet and sour ribs that His Excellency mentioned? Yun Tianyi was horrified. She had heard the Lord Go mention it countless times, but this was the first time she had seen it with her own eyes. The fragrance in the air caused her face to turn red uncontrollably. Bu Fang picked up a piece of sweet and sour ribs with his chopsticks and put it in his mouth. Slurp, slurp. The great soul overlord ingredient filled his mouth with the aroma of meaty meat. It was as if when he opened his mouth to speak, he would spit out rich spirit essence. He swallowed a piece of sweet and sour ribs. The divine power in Bu Fang's body began to flow and recover rapidly. That speed was simply amazing. A heaven god's divine power was as vast as the starry sky. Once it was exhausted, it would take years to recover. However, Bu Fang had only eaten a piece of sweet and sour ribs, and his divine power was almost fully recovered. The effect of this dish was simply heaven-defying. Bu Fang had eaten almost half of the sweet and sour ribs. Hades' era also wanted to join him. However, Bu Fang slapped him away. The rest is for the Lord Go. Don't steal it, Bu Fang said. Bu Fang thought for a moment, but in the end, he did not keep the sweet and sour ribs. Then, with one hand clasped behind his back and the other holding the sweet and sour ribs, Bu Fang took a step and rushed out of the protection of the Temple of Heaven God Time's array. Then, Bu Fang rushed straight into the chaos space. It was time to settle the scores between the Lord Go and Heaven God Transmigration, as well as between him and Heaven God Transmigration. With a single thought, he entered the chaos space. The next moment, everything in front of him became clear. Terrible attacks were exploding in the chaotic sphere. Lord Go had turned into a humanoid shadow and was constantly unleashing the power of the law of time. In the distance, Heaven God Transmigration, however, was calm and at ease. After so many years, why is your strength getting weaker and weaker? Heaven God Transmigration took charge. The law of transmigration turned into a gray wheel around him and kept spinning, causing the power of the law of time to dissipate like a gentle breeze. His aura completely suppressed Lord Go. He even had time to sneer. It was a confrontation between two heaven gods. That was the collision of perfected supreme laws. Wherever the laws collided, the void collapsed and was constantly devoured. Lord Dog, who had transformed into a humanoid light shadow, didn't say much. He raised his hands, and the law of time flowed over them. The flow of time around Heaven God Transmigration alternated between slow and fast. He wanted to kill Heaven God Transmigration with the power of time. You will pay for what you did back then, Lord Go said coldly. Pay? Heaven God Transmigration shook his head, his eyes much deeper. I'm in charge of transmigration. How can the price be calculated on me? I didn't do anything wrong back then. If it weren't for me, the chaos space would have been destroyed. Can you still look at the chaos space now? Heaven God Transmigration sneered, his face much colder. Lord Go's hair stood on end again. Time turned into a sharp blade and slashed down. The space around Heaven God Transmigration became hazy and distorted. It was as if a huge clock was crashing down. However, a bang rang out. The clock was instantly crushed. Heaven God Transmigration slowly walked out. You're too weak now, he said. Lord Go gritted his teeth. He had not recovered to his peak, so he was no match for Heaven God Transmigration. Moreover, Heaven God Transmigration had been comprehending and analyzing the aura of that existence for countless years, so his cultivation base was even more unfathomable now. Weak? How about I join in? Suddenly, an indifferent voice resounded. Lord Go froze. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes. The space around Heaven God Transmigration began to distort. A skinny figure appeared. He was carrying a black wok. As soon as his voice faded away, he swung the black wok. In an instant, it flew toward Heaven God Transmigration's face. Chapter 1686. How about I join you? Bu Fang's voice was indifferent. The law of space tore through the void and quietly appeared in front of Heaven God Transmigration. The black turtle constellation walk smashed toward Heaven God Transmigration's face. This smash was like a bolt of lightning, as though it wanted to shatter the void. From the looks of it, it was incomparably terrifying. Heaven God Transmigration did not expect that Bu Fang would appear so mysteriously. The supreme law of space? Heaven God Transmigration frowned. In front of him, the law of transmigration had turned into a gray stream of energy and was wheeling. Facing Bu Fang's walk, he did not dodge. He could sense Bu Fang's aura. A heaven god was indeed a heaven god, but he was only a little stronger than an ordinary ancient heaven god. He was still a little short of reaching the level of a modern-day heaven god. With such strength, he was fearless. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched slightly. He liked people who were so confident. Only those who were confident could be slapped in the face. Boom! The black turtle constellation walk drew a beautiful arc in the air. The law of destruction immediately enveloped the walk. Accompanied by the shattering void, it smashed hard on the stream of energy in front of Heaven God Transmigration. A cracking sound rang out. The stream of energy exploded. The gray stream of energy seemed to be overwhelmed, and cracks spread across its surface like a broken tile. Then it shattered. The black turtle constellation walk, wrapped in an unparalleled force, smashed down hard. Bam! The walk landed squarely on Heaven God Transmigration's face. At that moment, time seemed to stand still, and the cycle of reincarnation seemed to pause. Heaven God Transmigration's head jerked to the side. In the distance, Lord Go's mouth fell open. Bu Fang is still Bu Fang. He's as domineering as ever. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched slightly. He waved his hand. Immediately, a stream of light sped toward Lord Go. "Here, Lord Go, your sweet and sour ribs," Bu Fang said. Lord Go's eyes lit up. The light and shadow dissipated, revealing the appearance of a black dog. Facing the porcelain plate, it began wagging its tail and gorging on the food. Wait, why is half of the sweet and sour ribs missing? Lord Go suddenly raised his dog head. His mouth was stained with the juice of the liquor, and he asked in confusion. "Era ate half of it," Bu Fang said without blushing or skipping a beat. When the Lord Go heard this, he was furious. "How dare you touch Lord Go's sweet and sour ribs?" The dog's fur stood on end as Lord Go slammed his paw into the void. The law of time spread out, and the void seemed to collapse, forming a huge black hole. This was the primordial chaos. The void here was incredibly stable, far more stable than the chaosverse. But even so, the Lord Go's claw still smashed a hole in it. The corner of Bu Fang's mouth twitched. He mourned for Hades' era in his heart. However, the eyes of Heaven God Transmigration, who had been smashed by the walk, suddenly became sharp. Boom! The aura of transmigration burst out, and a tremendous force slammed into him. Bu Fang's figure floated into the distance. Bu Fang landed next to Lord Go, and Lord Go took a bite of the sweet and sour ribs. Bu Fang's heart skipped a beat. Heaven God Transmigration was indeed a top chaotic saint-level expert. He was even stronger than Swerin. Although Bu Fang had become a heaven god, he still seemed a little weak in front of Heaven God Transmigration. A large wound appeared on Heaven God Transmigration's face, and blood was dripping from it. He turned his head away. The wound on his face had healed, and there was no scar at all. The law of space. The law of destruction. Heaven God Transmigration narrowed his eyes cold. A new heaven god who comprehended 5 supreme laws of the universe, obtained the causality thrones of 4 heaven gods, and forced his way into the chaos space. "You're really bold. I tried to kill you when I sensed you. But I didn't expect you to succeed in the end," Heaven God Transmigration said. He took a deep breath. The gray vortex behind him grew larger and larger. The sound of cold chains entangling with each other rang out, lashing at the void and entangling heaven god transmigration. The current chaos space doesn't need a new heaven god. Heaven god transmigration said, narrowing his eyes. The next moment, his aura surged. Boom, boom, boom. One chain after another lashed toward Bufang as if to lock up Bufang's soul, pull it out, and suppress it in the transmigration. Bufang focused his eyes. He flipped his palm. The law of samsara emerged and slapped the ice-cold chain, causing it to fly backward. I know the law of transmigration too, Bufang said faintly. While eating the sweet and sour ribs, Lord Go also whipped out his paw and knocked the chain away. Heaven god transmigration narrowed his eyes, and his aura became cold. Why did you try to kill me again and again? Bufang asked, looking at Heaven god transmigration. He had wanted to ask this question for a long time. Since the beginning of the Xiaoyi divine dynasty, Heaven god transmigration's attacks had been haunting his mind like a nightmare. I told you, the chaos space doesn't need a new heaven god. Any sign of a new heaven god must be killed. Heaven god transmigration said coldly. However, Bufang was not satisfied with his answer. He shook his head, and the dragon bone kitchen knife emerged in his hand. No, it's definitely not because of this reason. He flipped the dragon bone kitchen knife, and a vast amount of knife energy soared into the sky. One knife after another kept converging and eventually turned into a heavenly knife that seemed to be about to cut the transmigration in half. One knife cut the transmigration. Bufang's eyes burst with golden light as he activated the god of cooking's eye. Countless knife lights converged into a single knife that was about to destroy heaven and earth. The whole chaos space seemed to be trembling. Heaven god transmigration focused his eyes. He raised his hand, and a gray vortex rushed up in an instant. The vortex collided with the knife. Rumble! The vortex seemed to be cut open. Bufang held the dragon bone kitchen knife, his hair waving. Heaven god transmigration's body slowly twisted and was gradually cut in half. Bufang's expression remained unchanged. This was not Heaven god transmigration's true form. Bufang had known it for a long time. He knew it the moment he appeared. The Lord Go also knew it. Otherwise, the Lord Go would not have dared to rush out so recklessly. In his current state, the Lord Go might be suppressed in an instant if he were to face the real Heaven god transmigration. He had been in charge of the chaos space for countless years, and no one knew how strong Heaven god transmigration had become. As that man said, "You are the variable in everything." Heaven god transmigration was cut in half, but the strange thing was that both halves of his body opened and closed their mouths at the same time. His body dissipated, and the gray samsara law continued to spread out. You shouldn't be in the chaos space. Heaven god transmigration fixed his eyes on Bufang. Variable? Bufang frowned. Suddenly, Bufang seemed to think of something. He narrowed his eyes, and a grave look flashed in them. Does the calamity of the soul demons have something to do with you? Bufang asked tentatively. However, Heaven god transmigration's answer made Bufang's pupils constrict. The cycle of reincarnation needs them. Countless restless souls enter the cycle of reincarnation, and they will all provide me with power. The cycle of reincarnation is where their hearts will be at ease. In the cycle of reincarnation, they will not feel pain. They will feel at ease, and I will obtain power. Heaven god transmigration, who had been cut in half, smiled evilly. Bufang thought of the countless people who had fallen in the calamity of the soul demons. His eyes were filled with viciousness. Then, he raised his hand and squeezed. The law of space stacked on top of each other. The two halves of Heaven god transmigration's body were crushed by the layers of space, and not even a speck of dust was left. He's crazy, Lord Go said with emotion as he licked the plate. Lord Go had experienced the calamity of the soul demons, and he had already noticed the difference. Logically speaking, the heaven gods could not turn a blind eye to the soul demons wreaking havoc. It was understandable that the modern-day heaven gods did not show up because heaven god transmigration was the only one left among the five. However, it was strange that none of the ancient heaven gods had shown up. Turned out that heaven god transmigration was the mastermind behind all this. He's really crazy. Creatures like the soul demons are extremely evil and devour all living beings. They should be everyone's enemy, but that old thief is conspiring with them. He's crazy. Bufang shook his head with an unsightly look on his face. If he had not stepped forward, the entire chaotic universe would have been destroyed. He had made the souls of all living beings fall into the cycle of transmigration to improve his own cultivation base. Such a person was indeed crazy. Back then, he did everything for power, but at that time, he was not as extreme as he is now. Lord Go put down the plate. He still wanted to continue. Heaven god transmigration had disappeared. However, a haze had completely enveloped their hearts. Perhaps time can really change everything. It can change a person's temperament and even the temperament of a god. Bufang exhaled and calmed the anger in his heart. Such a person did not deserve to be a god. Buzz, the chaos space was broken. Lord Go and Bufang landed back in the Temple of Heaven God time. Bufang's face was livid. Heaven God transmigration's true self did not come. Perhaps he was held back by something, but this was definitely not good news. Even though he was just a clone, he had nearly suppressed Lord Go. If he had not misjudged Bufang's strength, both Lord Go and Bufang might have been killed. The situation in the chaos space was indeed not optimistic. You're back? Where's that old thief? Hades' eyes lit up when he saw Bufang and Lord Go. Yuntiani could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. As long as they were safe, don't worry about that old thief for now. Lord Go has a claw. Take a look. However, what greeted Hades' was Lord Go's gnashing of teeth. Before long, Hades' miserable howl rang out in the palace. Yuntiani was stunned. She glanced at Bufang, as if she did not understand what was going on. Bufang's expression did not change. It's normal. You'll get used to it, he said lightly. I didn't eat sweet and sour ribs. Hades' howl rang out from the depths of the palace. Suddenly, half of Hades' body crawled out of the darkness. However, he was still dragged back into the darkness by the dog's paw. Damn it! In the Temple of Heaven God Transmigration, it was different from the dilapidated Temple of Heaven God time, which was full of ruins. Although the Palace of Heaven God Transmigration was not decorated with gold and jade, its grandeur was very different from the sadness of the other palaces. Countless gods were walking in the Palace of Heaven God Transmigration. There were even god emperors shuttling back and forth. Many ancient clans in the chaos space had submitted to Heaven God Transmigration. Many ancient heaven gods also guarded the temple. No one in the chaos space could resist Heaven God Transmigration's power. In the depths of the Temple of Heaven God Transmigration, in the underground of the magnificent palace, a huge blood-colored whirlpool was spinning. Gray transmigration energy kept pouring into it. The pool of blood was churning. The blood of gods, god kings, god emperors, and even heaven gods flowed in it. In the middle of the pool of blood, a figure was sitting cross-legged. Half of the figure's face was covered in blood-colored lines that kept spreading out like a spiderweb, revealing a terrifying aura. When he opened his eyes, the whites of his eyes had turned black, but his pupils were scarlet. A terrible aura kept rolling around him. Swoosh, before long, blood flowed. The divine power in the blood rushed into his body. In the transmigration, countless souls were howling as they were crushed into pieces and poured into his soul. His eyes were closed, and he looked ecstatic. The blood-colored lines receded. He put on a robe. Heaven God Transmigration stood beside the pool of blood. With a thought in his mind, The blood pool split into two, and a huge arm was being suppressed under the blood pool. The monstrous power of sin spread over the arm, rolling and boiling as if it had taken a physical form. He put his hands on the edge of the pool. Heaven God Transmigration took a deep breath, as if he was intoxicated by the power of sin. But soon a hesitant look appeared on his face. He shook his head as if trying to clear his mind. The arm of the soul God that I have nurtured for countless years. Don't worry. Soon you will belong to me. I sacrificed all the souls in the transmigration so that I could perfectly graft the arm of the soul God. I won't let anything stop us from merging. I hope you won't let me down. Heaven God Transmigration's eyes were full of fanaticism as he licked his lips and murmured. Chapter 1687. The miserable howls in the Temple of Heaven God time finally ended. Yuntiani had been counting the screams carefully, and she found that there were 108 of them in total. Obviously, His Excellency held a deep grudge against him for eating sweet and sour ribs. However, he deserved it. Who asked that idiot to eat His Excellency's sweet and sour ribs? Wait a minute, Yuntiani paused. It doesn't seem that idiot did it. Forget it. Whether he did it or not, in His Excellency's eyes, he was the one who ate it. I have to take the blame. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang paced through the Temple of Heaven God time. He walked at a steady pace. Although the palace was dilapidated, it was filled with the aura of time. Upon closer inspection, one could see the traces of time on the dilapidated walls. An invisible force enveloped the palace. Even though countless years had passed, this force was still guarding it loyally. Therefore, although the palace was dilapidated, it had not been completely eroded away by time. After a long time, Lord Go walked out of the depths of the palace with his enchanting cat-like steps. He raised his head. After eating the sweet and sour ribs, he seemed to have gained some weight, and the flesh on his body jiggled. Hades' era was sad and hesitant. He clutched the clothes in front of his chest, feeling indignant and resentful. Crackle, on the ground of the palace Bufang had built a fire. The aura of the divine flame permeated the whole palace, warming up the palace that had been covered in cold and loneliness for countless years. The comfortable aura warmed one's heart. Yuntiani sat in front of the divine flame, hugging her straight legs. The darkness was dispelled, and the palace was bright. The mottled aura of time became more conspicuous. Lord Go lay in front of the bonfire, squinting and looking a little sleepy. Nether King Ha kept sighing like a resentful wife in her boudoir. The grievance in his heart had no one to talk to. At this moment, he pointed to the sky and roared. He really did not eat the sweet and sour ribs. Of course, no one paid attention to him. Yuntiani's aura was not very good. She had forcibly activated her bloodline in order to cover the retreat of Bufang and Hades' era. The Yun clan was an ancient clan that had existed for a very long time in the primal chaos. They had even produced heavenly deities before. The blood of the heavenly god flowed through her veins. Activating one's bloodline was a huge burden on one's body. After all, without a heavenly god's physical body, obtaining the strength of a heavenly god could easily cause one's body to explode. Bufang seemed to have noticed this as well. Bufang took out a grill and placed it on the bonfire. Then, he cut off pieces of soul overlord meat, which were as thin as cicada wings. He placed the soul overlord meat on the grill. TSS. The soul overlord meat was as thin as a thin piece of paper. Roasted by the flame, it curled up and turned golden, translucent. The smell of barbecued meat wafted out. People couldn't help but drool. Era and Lord Go also raised their heads. Bufang prepared a special sauce and distributed it to everyone. Each of them grabbed a small plate and waited for the soul overlord meat to be cooked. Once it was cooked, they picked up a piece of soul overlord meat, dipped it in some sauce, and stuffed it into their mouth. When they bit into it, they tasted as crispy as a potato chip. The meat was not hard or hard to chew. It melted in their mouths and turned into a warm current that flowed into their bodies. The fatigue and chill in their bodies were instantly dispelled. It's delicious. Yuntiani was shocked. Her eyes widened and she could not close her mouth. The primitive feeling that tickled her taste buds was irresistible. Delicious, isn't it? There's still more delicious food. Hades Era, who had a paw print on his face, smiled at Yuntiani. Bufang young man had a lot of delicious food, and this was just one of them. What shocked Yuntiani even more was that the meat turned into a warm current that seemed to dispel the injuries in her body. The injuries caused by activating her bloodline were instantly healed. Even a divine elixir did not have such an effect. Little Hu and Xiaopi squeaked on Bufang's shoulders. Bufang picked up a piece of meat, carefully dipped it in the sauce, and handed it to the two little fellows. Your Excellency, what kind of meat is this? Yuntiani asked respectfully as she looked at Bufang. There were only 5 modern-day heaven gods in the chaos space. The man in front of her was the 6th modern-day heaven god. It was like a dream, and it was completely unbelievable. She could not believe that someone could comprehend the 5 supreme laws, obtain the causality throne of a heaven god, ascend to the chaos space, and become a heaven god in the chaos space. Yuntiani admired him very much for this. Soul Overlord meat, which is at the same level as heaven god transmigration. Bufang thought for a moment, then tilted his head and explained. There was nothing wrong with his explanation. Pride Great Soul Overlord was indeed an existence at the level of a chaotic saint, which was similar to heaven god transmigration. As soon as he said that, Yuntiani's heart skipped a beat. She squatted on the ground, her body trembling. This piece of meat is comparable to heaven god transmigration's meat? Good heavens! What the hell did I eat? Time passed slowly as they ate and chatted. Era could not sit still. He came to the chaos space to look for girls, not to catch up with a mangy dog. He kept winking at Bufang, wanting Bufang to take him to look for girls. However, Bufang was indifferent. He was not in a hurry to find girls. The most important thing now was to figure out something. As heaven god time, Lord Go had been asleep for a long time, and his memory of being a heaven god had completely recovered. What about the other heaven gods? Is he in a deep sleep like you? Bufang asked after thinking for a moment. Lord Go shook his head. Our slumber is more than that. Back then, we 5 heaven gods joined forces to fight against a palm that came from outside the chaos space. With the help of the array, we managed to resist it and cut off the arm. However, at the last moment we were tricked by heaven god transmigration. That old thief cast the formless transmigration divine ability and sent us 4 weak heaven gods into the transmigration. Our bodies were destroyed and we fell into a deep sleep. Even I, Lord Go, don't know where they are now. The divine ability of a heaven god was naturally very terrifying. As soon as the formless transmigration appeared, the 4 heaven gods could not resist it and fell into the transmigration. This was a little troublesome. Perhaps in some corner of the chaotic universe, a blade of grass could be the reincarnation of a heaven god. That arm must have fallen into old villain Samsara's hands. That arm is an extremely evil thing, the arm of a supreme existence. Samsara coveted that supreme power that surpassed the heavenly god realm, so he tricked us. He knew that we would not allow such an evil thing to remain in the chaos space. Lord Go sighed and said, "Countless years have passed. Countless years have passed. That old thief Samsara might have already found the method to obtain supreme power. However, with that old thief's current temperament, it might be a disaster for the chaos world." What Lord Go said made everyone's expression change. Bufang's face grew graver. Bufang had a guess, since heaven god transmigration led the soul demons to slaughter the chaotic universe. The arm Lord Go mentioned was probably the soul god's arm. The supreme being who smashed the temple of heaven gods with a palm was probably the sleeping soul god. This matter was getting more and more difficult. Bufang picked up a piece of meat and stuffed it into his mouth. Bufang, come with me. Lord Go suddenly looked at Bufang and said. That gave Bufang pause. Then, he rose to his feet and followed. Hades' Era wanted to follow as well, but as soon as he got to his feet, he was frightened by Lord Go's raised paw and sat back down. This mangy dog bullies people with his strength. Bufang twitched the corner of his mouth and did not say anything. What can you say when I bully you with my strength? A man and a dog walked through the dilapidated palace. Lord Go led Bufang deeper into the palace. This was probably the reason why the Temple of Heaven God Time had remained immortal for countless years. Creak. Lord Go stood up and pushed open a door. Then, he stepped into it with Bufang. As soon as he stepped through the door, Bufang felt as if he had stepped into a tunnel of time. Countless images flashed before his eyes. Where is this? Bufang asked. This is the secret of the Temple of Heaven God Time, Lord Go sighed. A formation had been set up in the room. Bufang froze when he saw it. This was because this formation was actually made up of many densely packed dots of light. Bufang was no stranger to these dots. They were the dots of light provided by the system every time it was teleported. Lord Go had been fortunate enough to experience that kind of teleportation once. That was why he looked at Bufang with a complicated expression. Do you see these dots of light? Don't they look familiar? Lord Go asked. Bufang nodded with an odd expression. That's right. Every formation in the Temple of Heaven God Time was set up by a supreme being for us. However, this formation couldn't withstand the palm strike from beyond the heavens. Lord Go sighed. The aura of this formation is very similar to your aura. That's why we heaven gods chose to give our causality thrones to you. Lord Go said. The importance of a Empyrean god's Tao seat was self-evident, unless a Empyrean god perished and the Tao seat became vacant. Otherwise, no new heaven god would be born. However, Bufang's appearance was an exception. We think you are the only one who can help us, Lord Go said. As he stroked the formation, Bufang felt a sense of familiarity. This wasn't a gourmet array, but it was similar to a gourmet array. How can I help you? Bufang asked, puzzled. It was not easy to help a heaven god. Kill heaven god transmigration? With Bufang's current strength, he was equivalent to an ordinary chaotic saint, about the same level as Serene. Heaven god transmigration had been a heaven god for countless years and had absorbed the souls of half of the chaotic universe's creatures. His strength was comparable to the strongest heaven god in all of history. Bufang did not have the ability to deal with him. Lord Go shook his head. Of course I'm not going to let you die. Lord Go wagged his tail, then raised his paw. He waved the paw in front of Bufang. The next moment, a golden paper emerged. Oh! Bufang froze when he saw the paper. This is, Lord Go nodded. That's right, this is a recipe. Do you know why we would rather risk injuring our origin to send you into the primal chaos? It's not because of anything else, it's because you're a chef. You're the only one who can understand this recipe and cook the dish in it. This is the recipe left behind by the supreme expert who created this array. Lord Go said excitedly. Bufang's pupils constricted. It was the god of cooking's menu, and it had been in his spirit sea for a long time. Bufang could not have mistaken it for something else. There are a total of 5 recipes. I have one, and the other heavenly god palaces have one. Of course, old thief Samsara also has one. In this world, you are the only one who can cook these dishes. I have a feeling that as long as you cook the dishes in this recipe, the call that is imprinted in the depths of our souls will make us, the heaven gods who have fallen into the transmigration, return. Bufang boy. Lord Go, I have never begged anyone in my life. This time I beg you, Lord Go. Lord Go smacked his lips. In the name of sweet and sour ribs, I beg you. Bu Fong twitched the corner of his mouth and returned the golden recipe to Lord Go. You don't have to beg me. We've fought side by side for so long, from the Light Wind Empire to the chaotic universe today. Lord Go, your business is my business. I'll take it. Bu Fong clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes flashing. He had never been afraid of cooking. In fact, Bu Fong was also a little curious. Who were the other heaven gods? Chapter 1688. The golden recipe was extraordinary. At least, it was extraordinary for ordinary people. The light flowing on it and the profoundness it emitted caused one's heart to tremble. In the following days, Bu Fong was studying the recipe. It was definitely not left behind by an ordinary chef. It was most likely left behind by the legendary god of cooking. Therefore, Bu Fong did not dare to be negligent in the slightest. He analyzed and read, carefully analyzing and comparing the ingredients marked in the recipe. He had even simulated cooking the recipe countless times in his mind. In the Temple of Heaven God time, the dilapidated temple was extremely quiet. Heaven God transmigration seemed to have calmed down and no longer came to cause trouble for Bu Fong and Lord Go. The chaos space seemed to have calmed down. Except for the occasional disturbance from some god kings or god emperors, it was very quiet around the Temple of Heaven God time. Recently, Hades' era had become a little melancholic. He often sat on the broken roof of the temple, looked at the chaos space in the distance, and sighed. With a pained look on his face, he would reach out his hand as if he wanted to pull the clouds in the sky to his chest. Yun Tianyi shuddered every time she saw Era's behavior. This psychopath. If Ha was not a close friend of her master, she would have thrown him out a long time ago. Lord Dog, on the other hand, was lying in the Heaven God Temple, sleeping and adjusting his energy. His strength had not recovered to its peak, and because he had given some of his causality thrones to Bu Fong, his foundation was a little unstable. Just like Lord Go, he now pinned his hopes on Bu Fong. He only hoped that Bu Fong could surprise him. Bu Fong's aura was very similar to that supreme expert's. It was this aura that attracted him. Perhaps it could bring them hope. In the Temple of Heaven God time, in the depths of the temple, Bu Fong frowned, holding his chin with one hand. His starry sky spirit sea was constantly spinning, and the scene in front of him was constantly changing. He was meditating, simulating cooking. The golden recipe floated in front of Bu Fong. The golden words on it seemed to have a mind of their own as they kept jumping around. Bu Fong stretched out his hand and waved it in the air. After a long time, Bu Fong slowly opened his eyes. There was a complicated look in his eyes. With a creak, the stone door was pushed open. Lord Go strode into the room with enchanting steps and glanced at Bu Fong. "How is it?" Lord Go's gentle and magnetic voice resounded. "Simulated cooking failed again," Bu Fong said lightly. "I've failed 800th time. The dish in the golden menu is very difficult," Bu Fong said. Lord Go also showed a solemn expression. He knew Bu Fong's cooking skills very well. After all, he had watched Bu Fong grow up. If even Bu Fong couldn't do it, then no one else in this world could cook it. "Is it so difficult?" Lord Go stuck out his tongue. He didn't know how to cook, but he knew how to eat. It's not simple. This recipe is very advanced. This dish uses the law of time as a guide, and Heaven God level ingredients as a supplement. Moreover, it needs special cooking methods to cook it. Furthermore, this dish is formless and intangible. It doesn't have a finished product. Every time it's cooked, it's full of chance, Bu Fong said. He also had a headache. It was the first time he had seen such a recipe. However, it was precisely because of this that it was more challenging. Bu Fong's heart was also looking forward to the finished form of this dish. "You mean, there's no specific dish on the menu?" Lord Go paused. "What kind of recipe is that?" That's why it's so advanced, Bufang said. Silence here is better than sound. Bufang tilted his head and thought for a moment. Lord Go nodded, yawned, and asked Bufang for a bowl of sweet and sour ribs. Then, he strode out with enchanting cat-like step. Boom! The stone door closed again, kicking up a cloud of smoke and dust. Bufang exhaled. His eyes flickered, and he fell into meditation again. In front of him, an invisible figure emerged, and he began the 801st meditation cooking. Hades' era was gone. When Yuntiani found him, she couldn't find him in the temple of Heaven God. She didn't know when he had sneaked out of the temple. Your Excellency, that guy is gone. Yuntiani looked at Lord Go nervously. As a descendant of the ancient clans, Yuntiani had submitted to Lord Go from the bottom of her soul. Lord Go did not take it seriously. He just waved his paw. It's okay. That guy will come back after he suffered a little, Lord Go said with a yawn. Yuntiani nodded, but she did not really understand. After that, they really didn't care about Nether King Erha's whereabouts. The chaos space was not peaceful at the moment, and Heaven God Transmigration's forces controlled all of it. Those ancient clans and ancient heaven gods, who had not submitted to Heaven God Transmigration, were hiding in different corners of the chaos space. Although Lord Go was free, he was actually taking a break from his busy schedule. He needed to gather these ancient clans and ancient heaven gods. After all, it would be very difficult for them to face Heaven God Transmigration alone. It worked. As time went by, more and more ancient clans gathered around the temple of Heaven God Time. There was even an ancient heaven god guarding the periphery. Of course, conflicts were bound to happen. Heaven God Transmigration and his subordinates would not allow this to happen. Therefore, many ancient heaven gods led their subordinates to besiege the remaining forces of the ancient clans. Conflicts kept happening in the chaos space. Rumble! The stone door opened. Bufang walked out with his hands clasped behind his back. His vermilion robe flapped noisily in the wind, but Bufang's face was calm. As soon as he came out, he attracted a lot of attention. Lord Go suddenly raised his head and looked at Bufang. There were many other people in the temple of Heaven God Time. Bufang seemed a little surprised. When did the Heavenly God Temple have so many people? It was so lively, and he was a little surprised. Is this the Heaven God who ascended from the mortal world? An expert of the ancient clans narrowed his eyes and looked at Bufang with awe. They had gathered here because of Heaven God Time's call. Although they did not trust Bufang, who was a heaven god from the mortal world, they still respected him. This was the basic respect for a heaven god. The chaos space was under Heaven God Transmigration's control, and most of the ancient clans who did not submit to him had been killed. These people were just struggling at death's door. Bufang nodded at the people around him. There were not many of them, only a dozen god kings and 2 god emperors. There was also a hunchbacked old man with a head full of white hair leaning against the wall. This old man was the only ancient heavenly god among these people. It's a success. Now we can start cooking. Bufang exhaled and said to Lord Go. Lord Go's fur stood on end. He was very excited. It's a success? There was a hint of disbelief in his voice. After 1,382 simulated cooking attempts, it's finally a success. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched slightly. He was a little numb after trying for so long. But fortunately it was a success. Bufang said something to Lord Go, then clasped his hands behind his back and left the Temple of Heaven God Time. He needed to look for some ingredients. He did not have some of them. Lord Go wanted to help, but Bufang refused. The surrounding ancient clans were somewhat puzzled. Bufang walked out of the Temple of Heaven God Time and into the chaos space. Heaven God Transmigration did not move. Bufang knew that he was brewing something, and when he unleashed it, it would be a catastrophe. The chaos space, he was like an egg yolk, wrapped in the boundless starry sky. The spiritual energy here was extremely rich, for all the spiritual energy in the universe was concentrated in this center. The chaos space was not a star, but it had many of the properties of a star. It was a world condensed purely by the power of the laws. The laws of light, darkness, and gravity floated everywhere in the chaos space. They formed a world out of the laws. In the chaos space, even the weakest person had reached the God realm, and even a newborn baby had the power of a god. That was the only way to survive in the chaos space. In the roiling clouds of the chaos space, Bu Fong held a leaf in his hand. The emerald leaf seemed to be glowing, and drops of crystal-clear water condensed on its surface. Below the leaf was a jade bottle. When the leaves dripped into the bottle, it was as if they were dripping into a vast ocean. These were the ingredients Bu Fong needed. Bu Fong walked through the chaos space, collecting ingredients in every corner. These ingredients were all described on the golden recipe. They were all very precious ingredients. It was very troublesome to collect them, and some of them required precise timing. For example, the purple dew in the chaos space. It was the essence of the spiritual energy in the chaos space. It was the crystallization of the intertwining laws in the chaos space. At least, it took Bu Fong a lot of time to collect them. Perhaps this was the so-called road to happiness was strewn with setbacks. However, in the process of collecting ingredients, Bu Fong also gained some insights about cooking. At his level, every bit of improvement in his cooking skills was extremely terrifying. Swish, it sounded like a delicate sound. Bu Fong grabbed the jade bottle and gently shook it. The corners of his mouth curled upward. Gathering ingredients was already so difficult, so the pressure on Bu Fong's cooking was even greater. If he failed, he would have to start all over again. For Bu Fong, for the Lord Go, and even for the entire chaos space, it would be fatal. After taking the jade bottle, Bu Fong exhaled. His figure disappeared in an instant. The law of space tore open the void and returned to the temple of Heaven God Time. It might be ironic, but for the current Heaven God Time, time was of the essence. Outside the dilapidated temple of Heaven God Time, many buildings had been built. They were built by the descendants of the ancient clan. A small city had been built around the ruins of the temple of Heaven God Time. This city could not compare to the temple of Heaven God Transmigration, but it was home to most of the ancient clan members who had not submitted to Heaven God Transmigration. It was worth mentioning that the number of ancient heaven gods had increased to 2. Although they could not compare to the 10 ancient heaven god guardians under Heaven God Transmigration, it was still a kind of growth. Bu Fong had returned. Naturally, it caused a sensation. Lord Go wagged his tail and followed Bu Fong. The two of them stepped into the depths of the temple of Heaven God Time. I've collected the ingredients. Now let's start cooking. Bu Fong looked at Lord Go. Are you confident? Lord Go narrowed his eyes. It's 50-50. Bu Fong did not guarantee anything. After all, he had only succeeded once in more than 1,000 simulated cooking attempts. For Bu Fong, he did not dare to be too confident. If I fail, I'll have to spend a lot of time collecting ingredients again. I really can't afford to fail. Bu Fong sighed with emotion. Lord Go wagged his tail and stuck out his tongue. Bu Fong boy, Lord Go watched you grow up. Believe in yourself. Your cooking skills can do it. Lord Go gave him a rare encouragement. It was as if he had learned how to give chicken soup to others like the system. Bu Fong twitched the corner of his mouth. The next moment, he let Lord Go leave the room. The stone door suddenly closed. The light in the room dimmed. Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat. The god of cooking sets emerged one after another, and a terrible aura filled the room. The golden recipe floated in the air. Bu Fong clasped his hands behind his back, and his eyes narrowed. The god of cooking's eye burst out in an instant, illuminating the whole room. The cooking for Lord Go had officially begun. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.